Chapter 7. Lotus and Cactus. I know what is and what has been. Not anything to me comes strange, who in so many years have seen and lived through every kind of change. I know when men are good or bad, when well or ill, he slowly said, when sad or glad, when sane or mad, and when they sleep alive or dead. And while the black night nothing saw, until the cold morn came at last, the old bed held the room in awe, with tales of its experience vast. It thrilled the gloom. It told such tales of human sorrows and delights, of fever moans and infant wails, of births and deaths and bridal nights. James Thompson, In the Room. Harriet left Miss Twitterton tucked up on the nuptial couch with a hot water bottle and an aspirin, and passing softly into the next room, discovered her lord in the act of pulling his shirt over his head. She waited for his face to reappear, and then said, "Hello." "Oh, hello. All serene?" "Yes, better now." "What's happening downstairs?" "Sellen's telephoned from the post office, and the super's coming over from Broxford with the police surgeon, so I came up to put on a collar and tie." "Of course," thought Harriet, secretly entertained. "Someone has died in our house, so we put on a collar and tie. Nothing could be more obvious. How absurd men are, and how clever in devising protective armour for themselves. What kind of a tie will it be? Black would surely be excessive. Dull purple, or an unobtrusive spot? No, a regimental tie. Nothing could be more proper. Purely official and committing one to nothing. Completely silly and charming." She smothered the smile from her lips and watched the solemn transference of personal property from blazer pockets to appropriate situations about a coat and waistcoat. "All this," observed Peter, "is a damned nuisance." He sat on the edge of the naked bedstead to exchange his slippers for a pair of brown shoes. "Not worrying you too much, is it?" His voice was a little smothered, with stooping to fasten the laces. "No. One thing is nothing to do with us. That is, he wasn't killed for the money we paid him. He had it all in his pocket, in notes. Good heavens! There's not much doubt he meant to make a bolt for it when somebody intervened. I can't say I feel any strong personal regret, do you? Far from it. Only, it is worrying you." "Blast!" "Not really. Only when I think about him lying down there in the cellar all the time. I know it's perfectly idiotic of me, but I can't help wishing we hadn't slept at his bed. I was afraid you might feel like that." He got up and stood for a moment looking from the window over the sloping field and woodland that stretched away beyond the lane. "And yet, you know, that bed must be pretty nearly as old as the house. The original bits of it, anyhow. It could tell a good many tales of births and deaths and bridal nights. One can't escape from these things, except by living in a brand-new villa and buying one's furniture in the Tottenham Court Road. All the same, I wish to God it hadn't happened. I mean, if it's going to make you uncomfortable every time you think about it—" "Oh, Peter, no. I didn't mean that. It's not as though— Well, it would be different if we'd come here in another sort of way. Well, that's the point. Supposing I'd come here to disport myself with somebody who didn't matter twopence, I should be feeling a complete wart. Quite unreasonable, I dare say, but I can be just as unreasonable as anyone else if I put my mind to it. But as things are, no. Nothing that you or I have done is any insult to death. Unless you think so, Harriet. I should say, if anything could sweeten the atmosphere that wretched old man left behind him, it would be the feeling that the feeling I have for you, at any rate, and yours for me, if you feel like that. I do assure you, so far as I am concerned, there's nothing trivial about it." "I know that. You're absolutely right. I won't think about it that way any more." "Peter, there weren't rats in the cellar, were there?" "No, dearest, no rats, and all quite dry. Just a perfectly good cellar." "I'm glad. I was sort of imagining rats. Not that I suppose it matters very much after one's dead. But I don't seem to mind all the rest nearly as much if I don't have to think of rats. In fact, I don't mind at all. Not now. We shall have to stick round till after the inquest, I'm afraid, but we could easily get put up somewhere else. That's one thing I was going to ask you about. There's probably a decent inn in Pagford or Broxford. Harriet considered this. No, I don't care about that. I think I'd rather stay here. Are you sure? Yes. It's our house. It never was his, not really. And I'm not going to let you think there's any difference between your feelings and mine. That'll be worse than rats, even. My dear, I'm not proposing to make staying here a test of your affections. Not love, quoth he, but vanity sets love a task like that. It's easy enough for me. I was begotten and born in the bed where 12 generations of my forefathers were born and wedded and died, and some of them made pretty poor ends from the parson's point of view, so I don't suffer much from hauntings of that kind. But there's no reason at all why you shouldn't feel rather differently. Look, don't say another word about it. We're going to stay here and exorcise the ghosts. I'd rather. Well, if you change your mind, tell me, he said, still uneasy. I shan't change my mind. We'd better go down now, if you're ready, because Miss Twitterton ought to get some sleep, if she can. Now I come to think of it, she didn't ask for another bedroom, and it's her own uncle. Country people are very matter-of-fact about life and death. They live so close to reality. So do your sort of people. It's my sort that go all sanitary and civilized, and get married in hotels and do their births and deaths in nursing homes where they give offence to nobody. I say, Peter, do we have to feed all those doctors and superintendents and people? And does Bunter carry on all by himself, or ought I to give him some orders? Experience has taught me, said Peter, as they moved down the stair, that no situation finds Bunter unprepared. That he should have procured the Times this morning by the simple expedient of asking the milkman to request the postmistress to telephone to Broxford and have it handed to the bus conductor to be dropped at the post office and brought up by the little girl who delivers the telegrams is a trifling example of his resourceful energy. But he would probably take it as a compliment if you were to refer the difficulty to him and congratulate him when he tells you that everything is provided for. I will. In the short time that they'd been upstairs, Mr. Puffet had evidently finished his chimney sweeping, but the sitting-room had been cleared of dust-sheets and a fire kindled upon the hearth. A table had been drawn out into the centre of the room. On it stood a tray filled with plates and cutlery. Passing through into the passage, Harriet was aware of a good deal of activity in progress. Before the shut door of the cellar stood the uniformed figure of P.C. Selim, like young Harry with his beaver on, prepared to resist any interference with the execution of his duty. In the kitchen, Mrs. Ruddle was cutting sandwiches. In the scullery, Crutchley and Mr. Puppet were clearing a quantity of pots and pans and old flower-pots from a long deal dresser, preparatory, as appeared from the presence beside them of a steaming pail, to scrubbing it clean to receive the body of its late owner. In the back door stood Bunter, conducting some kind of financial transaction with 2 men who seemed to have arrived from nowhere in a motor van. Beyond them could be seen Mr. McBride, strolling about the backyard. He had the air of inventorying its contents with a view to assessing their value. And at that moment there came a heavy knock on the front door. "That'll be the police," said Peter. He went to let them in, and at the same time Bunter finished paying the men, came in and shut the back door sharply. "Oh, Bunter," said Harriet, "I see you're giving us something to eat." Yes, my lady. I succeeded in intercepting the Home and Colonial and procuring some ham for sandwiches. There is also a portion of the foie gras and the Cheshire cheese which we brought from town. The draught beer in the cellar being at the moment not readily available, I took the liberty of instructing Mrs. Ruddle to fetch a few bottles of Bass from the village. If anything further should be required, there is a jar of caviar in the hamper, but we have no lemons, I am sorry to say. Oh, I don't think caviar would strike the right note, Bunter, do you? No, my lady. The heavy luggage has just arrived per Carter Patterson. I instructed that it should be deposited in the oil shed until we had leisure to attend to it. The luggage? Oh, I'd forgotten all about it. Very natural, my lady, if I may say so. The scullery, went on Bunter, with a touch of hesitation, appeared a more suitable place than the kitchen for, the medical gentleman to work in. Certainly, said Harriet, with emphasis. Yes, my lady. I inquired of his lordship whether, in view of all the circumstances, he would desire me to order in any coal. He said he would refer the matter to your ladyship. He has. You can order the coal. Very good, my lady. I fancy there will be time between lunch and dinner to effect a clearance of the kitchen chimney, provided there is no interference from the police. Would your ladyship wish me to instruct the sweep accordingly? Yes, please. I don't know what we should do without your head for detail, Bunter. I am much obliged to your ladyship. The police party had been taken into the sitting-room. Through the half-open door one could hear Peter's high, fluent voice giving a lucid account of the whole incredible business, with patient pauses for interrogation or to allow a deliberate constabulary pencil to catch up with him. Harriet sighed angrily. I do wish he hadn't to be worried like this. It's too bad. Yes, my lady. Bunter's face stirred as though some human emotion were trying to break through. He made no further comment, but something which Harriet recognized as sympathy seemed to waft out of him. She said impulsively, I wonder, do you think I'm right in ordering the coal? It was scarcely fair to push Bunter onto such delicate ground. He remained impassive. It is not for me to say, my lady. She was determined not to be beaten. You have known him much longer than I have, Bunter. If his lordship had only himself to consider, do you suppose he would go or stay? Under those circumstances, my lady, I fancy his lordship would decide to remain. That's what I wanted to know. You'd better order enough coal for a month. Certainly, my lady. The men were coming out of the sitting-room. They were introduced. Dr. Craven, Superintendent Kirk, Sergeant Blaze. The cellar door was opened. Somebody produced an electric torch, and they all went down. Harriet, relegated to the woman's role of silence and waiting, went into the kitchen to help with the sandwiches. The role, though dull, was not a useless one, for Mrs. Ruddle, with a large knife in her hand, was standing at the scullery door as though prepared to carry out a butcherly kind of post-mortem upon whatever might be brought up from the cellar. Mrs. Ruddle! Mrs. Ruddle gave a violent start and dropped the knife. Oh, Lord, my lady, you did give me a turn. You want to cut the bread thinner, and please shut that door. A slow, heavy shuffling, and then voices. Mrs. Ruddle broke off in the middle of a spirited piece of narrative to listen. Yes, Mrs. Ruddle? Yes, my lady. So I says to him, you needn't think you're going to catch me that way, Jos Helen, I says. Like to make out you're somebody, don't you, I says. I wonder you has the face, seeing what a fool you made of yourself over Aggie Twitterton's ends. No, I says, when a proper policeman comes, he can ask all the question he likes. But don't you think you can go ordering me about, I says. And me old enough to be your grandma. You can put away that there notebook, I says. Go on, I says. It'd make me old cat laugh to see you, I says. I'll tell him all I knows, I says. Don't you fret yourself when the time comes. You ain't no right, he says, to obstruct an officer of the law. Law, I says, call yourself the law? If you're the law, I says, I don't think much of it. He got that red, you'll hear about this, he says. And I says, and you'll hear something too. None of your sauce, I says. They'll be glad enough to hear what I has to tell 'em, I just say, without you going and twisting it all up before they gets it, I says. So he says. There was a peculiar mixture of malice and triumph in Mrs. Ruddle's voice, which Harriet felt the episode of the hens did not altogether account for. But at this moment Bunter came in by the passage door. His lordship's compliments, my lady, and Superintendent Kirk will be glad to see you for a moment in the sitting-room, if you can spare the time. Superintendent Kirk was a large man with a mild and ruminative expression. He seemed already to have obtained from Peter most of the information he needed, asking only a few questions to confirm such points as the time of the party's arrival at Tallboys and the appearance of the sitting-room and kitchen when they came in. What he really wanted to get from Harriet was a description of the bedroom. All Mr. Noakes's clothes had been there? His toilet articles? No suitcases? No suggestion that he intended to leave the house at once? No? Well, that confirmed the idea that Mr. Noakes intended to get away, but was in no immediate hurry. Not, for example, particularly expecting any unpleasant interview that night. The superintendent was much obliged to her ladyship. He should be sorry to disturb poor Miss Twitterton, and after all nothing much was to be gained by examining the bedroom at once, since its contents had already been disturbed. That applied, of course, to the other rooms as well. Unfortunate, but nobody could be blamed for that. They might be a bit further on when they had Dr. Craven's report. He would perhaps be able to tell them whether Noakes had been alive when he fell down the cellar steps, or had been killed and thrown there afterwards. No bloodshed, that was the trouble, though the skull had been broken by the blow. And with so many people in and out of the house all night and morning, one could scarcely expect footprints or anything like that. At any rate, nothing had been seen to suggest a struggle. Nothing. Mr. Kirk was greatly obliged. Harriet said not at all, and murmured something about lunch. The superintendent said he saw no objection to that. He had finished with the sitting-room for the moment. He would just like a word with this fellow McBride about the financial side of the business, but he would send him in as soon as he had done with him. He tactfully refused to join the party, but he accepted the offer of a mouthful of bread and cheese in the kitchen. When the doctor had finished, he would finish the interrogations in the light of whatever the medical examination might reveal. Years afterwards, Lady Peter Wimsey was accustomed to say that the first few days of her honeymoon remained in her memory as a long series of assorted surprises, punctuated by the most incredible meals. Her husband's impressions were even less coherent. He said he had had all the time the sensation of being slightly drunk and tossed in a blanket. The freakish and arbitrary fates must have given the blanket an especially energetic tweak to have tossed him towards the end of that strange, embarrassed luncheon, so high over the top of the world. He stood at the window whistling. Bunter, hovering about the room, handing sandwiches and straightening out the last traces of disorder left after the sweep's departure, recognized the tune. It was the one he had heard the night before in the woodshed. Nothing could have been less suited to the occasion. Nothing should more deeply have offended his inborn sense of propriety. Yet, like the poet Wordsworth, he heard it and rejoiced. "Another sandwich, Mr. McBride?" The newly wedded lady doing the honours at her table for the first time. Curious, but true. "No more, thanks. Much obliged to you." Mr. McBride swallowed the last drop of his beer and polished his mouth and fingers politely with his handkerchief. Bunter swept down upon the empty plate and glass. "I hope you've had something to eat, Bunter." One must consider the servants. Only two fixed points in the universe, death and the servants' dinner, and there they both were. "Yes, thank you, my lady." "I suppose they'll be wanting this room in a minute. Is the doctor still there?" "I believe he has concluded his examination, my lady." "Nice job, I don't think," said Mr. McBride. La caille la torterella et la jolie pédrie, auprès de ma blonde, qu'il fait bon, fait bon, fait bon, auprès de ma blonde. Mr. McBride looked round, scandalized. He had his own notions of propriety. Bunter darted hastily across the room and attracted the singer's wandering attention. Yes, Bunter? Your lordship will excuse me, but in view of the melancholy occasion—" What? "Oh, sorry. Was I making a noise?" "My dear." His swift, secret, reminiscent smile was a challenge. She beat it down and achieved the right tone of wifely rebuke. "Poor Miss Twitterton's trying to get some sleep." "Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, a dash thoughtless of me. And in a house of bereavement and all that." His face darkened with a sudden odd impatience. "Though if you ask me, I doubt whether anybody—I say anybody— feels particularly bereft." "Except," said Mr. McBride, "that chap Crutchley with his £40. I fancy that grief's genuine." "From that point of view," said his lordship, "you should be the chief mourner." "It won't keep me awake at night," retorted Mr. McBride. "It ain't my money, you see," he added frankly. He rose, opened the door, and glanced out into the passage. "I only hope they're getting a move on out there. I've got to toddle back to town, you see, and Mr. Abrams. Pity you ain't on the telephone." He paused. "If I was you, I wouldn't let it worry me. Seems to me deceased was a dashed unpleasant old gink and well out of the way." He went out, leaving the atmosphere clearer, as though by the removal of funeral flowers. "I'm afraid that's true," said Harriet. "Just as well, isn't it?" Wimsey's tone was studiously light. "When I'm investigating a murder, I hate to have too much sympathy with the corpse. Personal feelings cramp the style. But, Peter, need you investigate this? It's rather rotten for you." Bunter, piling plates on a tray, made for the door. This, of course, was bound to happen. Let them fight it out for themselves. He had delivered his own warning. "No, I needn't. But I expect I shall. Murders go to my head like drink. I simply can't keep off them. Not even now. They can't expect you, surely. You've got a right to your own life sometimes, and it's such a beastly little crime, sordid and horrible. That's just it," he broke out with unexpected passion. "That's why I can't leave it alone. It's not picturesque. It's not exciting. It's no fun at all, just dirty, brutal bashing, like a butcher with a poleaxe. It makes me sick. But who the hell am I to pick and choose what I'll meddle in?" "I see. But after all, this was just wished on us. It's not as though you'd been called in to help." "How often am I called in, I wonder?" he demanded rather bitterly. "I call myself in half the time out of sheer mischief and inquisitiveness. Lord Peter Wimsey, the aristocratic sleuth. Oh, my God. The idle rich gentleman who dabbles in detection. That's what they say, isn't it? Sometimes. I lost my temper with somebody who said that once, before we were engaged. It made me wonder if I wasn't getting rather fond of you. Did it? Oh, then perhaps I'd better not justify that view of myself. What do such fellows as I, crawling between heaven and earth? I can't wash my hands of a thing merely because it's inconvenient to my lordship, as Bunter says of the sweep. I hate violence. I loathe wars and slaughter, and men quarrelling and fighting like beasts. Don't say it isn't my business. It's everybody's business. Of course it is, Peter. Go ahead. I was just being feminine or something. I thought you looked as if you would be better for a little peace and quiet, but you don't seem to shine as a lotus-eater." "I can't eat lotus, even with you," he said pathetically, "with murdered bodies popping up all over the place." "You shan't, Angel, you shan't. Have a nice mouthful of prickly cactus instead, and don't pay any attention to my imbecile efforts to strew your path with rose leaves. It won't be the first time we've followed the footprints together. Only—" She faltered a moment as another devastating matrimonial possibility loomed up like a nightmare. "Whatever you do, you'll let me take a hand, won't you?" To her relief, he laughed. "All right, Domina. I promise you that. Cactus for both or neither, and no lotus till we can share it. I won't play the good British husband in spite of your alarming plunge into wifeliness. The Ethiopian shall stay black and leave the leopardess her spots." He appeared satisfied, but Harriet cursed herself for a fool. This business of adjusting oneself was not easy, after all. Being preposterously fond of a person didn't prevent one from hurting him unintentionally. She had an uncomfortable feeling that his confidence had been shaken, and that this was not the end of the misunderstanding. He wasn't the kind of man to whom you could say, "Darling, you're wonderful, and whatever you do is right," whether you thought so or not. He would write you down a fool. Nor was he the sort who said, "I know what I'm doing, and you must take my word for it." Thank God for that, anyway. He wanted you to agree with him intelligently or not at all. And her intelligence did agree with him. It was her own feelings that didn't seem to be quite pulling in double harness with her intelligence. But whether it was her feeling for Peter, or her feeling for the deceased Mr. Noakes, butchered to make a busman's honeymoon for them, or a merely selfish feeling that she didn't want to be bothered at this moment with corpses and policemen, she was not sure. "Cheer up, sweetheart," said Peter. "They may not want my kind assistance. Kirk may cut the Gordian knot by booting me out." "Well, he'd be an idiot," said Harriet, with prompt indignation. Mr. Puffet entered suddenly without knocking. "They're taking Mr. Noakes away. Shall I be getting on with the kitchen chimney?" He walked across to the fireplace. "Draws beautifully now, don't she? I always said there was nothing the matter with the flue. Ah, it's a good thing Mr. Noakes ain't alive to see all that heap of coal. That's a fire as does credit to any chimney." "All right, Puffet," said Peter, absently. Carry on." Steps on the path, and a dismal little procession passing the window. A sergeant of police and another uniformed man carrying a stretcher between them. "Very good, my lord." Mr. Puffet glanced from the window and removed his bowler hat. "And where's all his cheese paring brought him now?" he demanded. "Nowhere." He marched out. "De mortuis," said Peter, and then some. "Yes, he seems to be getting a nice derangement of epitaphs, poor old creature." Corpses and policemen. There they were, not to be got rid of, whatever one's feelings might be. Much better to accept the situation and do one's best. Superintendent Kirk came in, followed by Joe Sullen. "Well, well," said Peter, "all ready for the 3rd degree?" "'Tain't likely to come to that, my lord," replied Mr. Kirk jovially. "You and your lady had something better to do last week than committing murders, I'll be bound. That's right, Joe. Come along. Let's see what you can do with a bit of shorthand. I'm sending my sergeant over to Broxford to pick up what he can there, so Joe can give me a hand with the statements. I'd like to use this room, if it's not inconvenient." "Not at all." Seeing the superintendent's eye fixed modestly upon a spindly specimen of Edwardian craftsmanship, Peter promptly pushed forward a stout, high-backed chair with gouty arms and legs, and an eruption of heavy scrollwork about its head. "You'll find this about up to your weight, I would fancy." "Nice and imposing," said Harriet. The village constable added his comment. "That's old Noakes's chair, that was." "So," said Peter, "Galahad will sit down in Merlin's seat." Mr. Kirk, on the point of lowering his solid 15 stone into the chair, jerked up abruptly. "Alfred," said he. "Lord Tennyson." "Got it in one," said Peter, mildly surprised. A glow of enthusiasm shone softly in the policeman's ox-like eyes. "You're a bit of a student, aren't you, Superintendent?" "Ah, I like to do a bit of reading in my off-duty," admitted Mr. Kirk bashfully. "It mellows the mind." He sat down. "I often think as the routine of police duty may tend to narrow a man and make him a bit hard, if you take my meaning. When I find that happening, I say to myself, what you need, Sam Kirk, is contact with a great mind or so after supper. Reading maketh a full man." "Conference a ready man," said Harriet.
"And writing an exact man," said the superintendent. "Mind that, Joe Sullen, and see you let me have them notes so as they can be read to make sense."
"Francis Bacon," said Peter, a trifle belatedly. "Mr. Kirk, you're a man after my own heart."
"Ah, thank you, my lord. Bacon. You'd call him a great mind, wouldn't you? And what's more, he came to be Lord Chancellor of England, so he's a bit in the legal way, too. Oh, well, I suppose we'll have to get down to business."
As another great mind so happily put it, "However entrancing it is to wander through a garden of bright images, are we not enticing your mind from another subject of almost equal importance?"
What's that?" said the superintendent. Oh, yeah, that's a new one on me. Garden of bright images, eh? That's pretty, that is."
"Kai Lung," said Harriet. "Golden hours of," said Peter. "Ernest Brammer."
Make a note of that for me, will you, Joe? Bright images. That's just what you get in poetry, isn't it? Pictures, as you might say. And in a garden, too. What you'd call flowers of fancy, I say. Well, now," he pulled himself together and turned to Peter. "As I was saying, we mustn't waste time with the fancy work. About this money we found on the body. Now, what did you say you paid him for the house?" "$650 altogether, 50 at the beginning of the negotiations, and the 600 at quarter-day." "That's right. Oh, that accounts for the 600 he had in his pocket. He just about cashed it the day he was put away."
"The quarter-day was a Sunday. The cheque was actually dated and sent on the 28th. It would have reached him Monday."
"Ah, that's right. Well, we'll check the payment at the bank, but it's not really necessary. Wonder what they thought of him, taking it away in cash instead of paying it in. It's a pity it ain't the bank's business to give us the office when people do things that look like boating. But it wouldn't do, naturally.
He must have had it in his pocket when he told poor Crutchley that he had no money to pay his £40. He could have given it to him then."
"Course he could, my lady, if he had wanted to. He was a proper old dodger, was Mr. Noakes, a regular artful dodger. Charles Dickens. That's right. Ha-ha. There's an author that knew a bit about crooks, didn't he? Pretty rough place London must have been in those days, if you go by what he says, Fagin and all. But we wouldn't hang a man for being a pickpocket, not now. Well, and having sent the cheque, you just came on here the next week and left it to him. Yes, here's his letter, you see, saying he'd have everything ready. It's addressed to my agent. We really ought to have sent someone ahead to see to things, but the fact is, as I told you before, what with newspaper reporters and one thing and another, they give us a lot of trouble, them fellows, said Mr. Kirk sympathetically. When, said Harriet, they gate-crash your flat and try to bribe your servants, fortunately Bunter is sea-green incorruptible. Carlyle, said Mr. Kirk with approval. French Revolution. Ha-ha. Seems a good man, that Bunter. Head screwed on the right way. But we needn't have troubled, said Harriet. We'll have them all on our back now. Ah, said Mr. Kirk. That's what comes of being a public character. You can't escape the fierce light that beats upon— Here, said Peter, that's not fair. You can't have Tennyson twice. Anyway, there it is, and what's done— No, I may want Shakespeare later on. The ironical part of it is that we expressly told Mr. Noakes we were coming for peace and quiet and didn't want the whole thing broadcast about the neighbourhood. Well, he saw to that all right, said the superintendent. But, George, you were making it easy for him, weren't you? Easy as pie. Off he could go with no inquiry. Don't suppose he meant to go quite so far as he did, all the same. Meaning there's no chance of it being suicide? Ah, not likely, is it? With all that money on him? Besides, the doctor says there's no chance of it. We'll come to that later. Now, about them doors now. You're sure they were both locked when you arrived? Absolutely. The front we opened ourselves with the latchkey, and the back, well, let me see. Bunter opened that, I think, said Harriet. Better have Bunter in, said Peter. He'll know. He never forgets anything. He called Bunter, adding, What we want here is a bell. And you saw no disturbance except what you've mentioned. Eggshells and such, no marks, no weapon, nothing out of its place. I'm sure I didn't notice anything, said Harriet, but there wasn't much light, and of course we weren't looking for anything. We didn't know there was anything to look for. Wait a bit, said Peter. Wasn't there something struck me this morning? No, I don't know. It was all upset for the sweep, you see. I don't know what I thought. Well, if there was anything, it's gone now. Oh, Bunter, Superintendent Kirk wants to know, was the back door locked when we arrived last night? Locked and bolted, my lord, top and bottom. Did you notice anything funny about the place at all? Apart, said Mr. Bunter warmly, from the absence of those conveniences that we were led to expect, such as lamps and coal and food and the key of the house, and the beds made up and the chimneys swept, and allowing further for the soiled crockery in the kitchen and the presence of Mr. Noakes's personal impedimenta in the bedroom, no, my lord. The house presented no anomalies nor incongruities of any kind that I was able to observe. Except— Yes, said Mr. Kirk hopefully. I attached no significance to it at the time, said Bunter slowly, as though he were admitting to a slight defection from duty, but there were 2 candlesticks in this room upon the sideboard. Both candles were burnt down to the sockets. Burnt out. So they were, said Peter. I remember seeing you cleaning out the wax with a penknife. Nights' candles are burnt out. The superintendent, absorbed in the implication of Bunter's statement, neglected the challenge until Peter poked him in the ribs and repeated it, adding, I knew I should want Shakespeare again. Eh? Said the superintendent. Night's candles, Romeo and Juliet. Not much of that about this here. Burnt out? Yes, they must have been alight when he was killed. After dark, that means. He died by candlelight. Sounds like the title of a highbrow thriller. One of yours, Harriet? When found, make a note of. Captain Cuttle, said Mr. Kirk, not to be caught napping again. October 2nd. Sun will be setting about 5:30. No, it was summertime, say 6:30. I don't know as that gets us much further. You didn't see nothing lying about as might have been used for a weapon, no mallet or bludgeon, eh? Nothing in the way of a— He's going to say it, said Peter to Harriet in a whisper. In the way of a blunt instrument? He said it. I never really believed they did say it. Well, now you know.
No, said Bunter, after a short meditation. Nothing of that description. Nothing beyond the customary household utensils in their appropriate situations. Have we any idea, inquired his lordship, what kind of a jolly old blunt instrument we are looking for? How big? What shape? Pretty heavy, my lord, that's all I can say. With a smooth, blunt head, meaning the skull was cracked like an eggshell, but the skin hardly broken. So there's no blood to help us, and the worst of it is we don't know no more than Adam whereabouts it all happened. You see, Dr. Craven says deceased. Here, Joe, where's that letter Doctor wrote out for me to send to the coroner? Read it out to his lordship. Maybe he'll be able to make it out, and seeing he's had a bit of experience and more education than you and me. Beats me what doctors want to use them long words for. Mind you, it's educational, I don't say it isn't. I'll have a go at it with the dictionary before I goes to bed, and I'll know I'm learning something. But to tell you the truth, we don't have many murders and violent deaths hereabouts, so I don't get much practice in the technical part, as you might say. All right, Bunter, said Peter, seeing that the superintendent had finished with him. You can go. Harriet thought Bunter seemed a little disappointed. He would doubtless have appreciated the doctor's educational vocabulary. P.C. Sellon cleared his throat and began. Dear sir, it is my duty to notify— No, not there, interrupted Kirk, where it begins about deceased. P.C. Sellon found the place and cleared his throat again. I may state, as the result of a superficial examination— Is that it, sir? That's it. That deceased appears to have been struck with a heavy blunt instrument of some considerable superficies. Meaning, he said by that, explained the superintendent, as it wasn't a little fiddling thing like the beak of a hammer. On the posterior part of the— I can't rightly make this out, sir. Looks to me like onion. And that makes sense all right, only it don't sound like doctor's language. It couldn't be that, Joe. Nor it ain't geranium, neither. Leastway, there's no tail to the G. A cranium, perhaps, suggested Peter. The back of the skull. That'll be it, said Kirk. That's where it is, anyhow. Never mind what the doctor calls it. Yes, sir. A little above and behind the left ear, the apparent direction of the blow being from behind downwards. An extensive fracture. Hello, said Peter. On the left from behind downwards? Well, that looks like another of our old friends. The left-handed criminal, said Harriet. Yes. Surprising how often you get them in detective fiction. A sort of sinister twist running right through the character. Might be a back-handed blow. Not likely. Who goes about swatting people left-handed? Unless the local tennis champion wanted to show off, or a navvy mistook old Noakes for a pile that needed driving. A navvy'd have hit him plumb in the centre. They always do. You think they're going to brain the man who holds the thing up, but it never happens. I've noticed that. But there's another thing. My recollection of Noakes is that he was awfully tall. Quite right, said Kirk. So he was. 6'4". Only he stooped a bit. Call it 6'2" or 3. You want a pretty tall murderer, said Peter. Wouldn't a long-handled weapon do, like a croquet mallet or a golf club? Yes, or a cricket bat. Or a beetle, of course. Or a spade, the flat side. Or a gun stock, possibly even a poker. It'd have to be a long, heavy one with a thick knob. I think there's one in the kitchen. Or even a broom, I suppose. Don't think it'd be heavy enough, though it is possible. How about an axe or a pick? No, not blunt enough. They've got square edges. What other long things are there? I've heard of a flail, but I've never seen one. A lead cosh, if it was long enough. Not a sandbag, they bend. A lump of lead in an old stocking would be handy. Yes, but look here, Peter. Anything would do, even a rolling pin, always supposing— Yes, I thought of that. He might have been sitting down. So it might be a stone or a paperweight like that one on the windowsill there. Mr. Kirk started. Struth, he observed. Aye, you're quick, you two. Not much you miss, is there? And the lady's as smart as the gentleman. It's her job, said Peter. She writes detective stories. Does she now? Said the superintendent. I can't say I read a lot of them, though Mrs. Kirk, she likes a good Edgar Wallace now and again. But I couldn't rightly call him a mellowing influence to a man in my line. I read an American story once, and the way the police carried on, well, it didn't seem right to me.
Here, Joe, hand me that paperweight, would you? Aye, not that way. Ain't you never heard of fingerprints? Sellen, his large hand clasped round the stone, stood awkwardly and scratched his head with his pencil. He was a big, fresh-faced young man who looked as though he would be better at grappling with drunks than measuring prints and reconstructing the timetable of the crime. At least he opened his fingers and brought the paperweight balanced on his open palm. "That won't take fingerprints," said Peter. "It's too rough. Edinburgh granite, from the look of it." "I might have done the bashing, though," said Kirk. "Leastways the underneath part, or this here rounded end. Model of a building, ain't it? Edinburgh Castle, I fancy. It shows no sign of skin or hair or anything about it. Look, just a minute." He picked it up by a convenient chimney, examined its surface with a lens, and said definitely, "No." "Oh, well, that gets us nowhere. We'll have a look at the kitchen poker presently. You'll find lots of fingerprints on that. Bunter's and mine and Mrs. Ruddle's, possibly Puffett's and Crutchley's." "Ah, that's the devil of it," said the superintendent frankly. "But none the more for that, Joe. You keep your fingers off anything what looks like a weapon. If you sees any of them things what his lordship and her ladyship here mentioned laying about, you just leave 'em be and shout till I come, see?" "Yes, sir." "To go back," said Peter, "to the doctor's report. I take it Noakes can't have bashed the back of his own head falling down the steps. He was an oldish man, wasn't he?" 65, my lord. Sound as a bell, though, as far as you can judge now. Eh, Joe?" "That's a fact, sir. Boasted of it, he did. Talked large. As doctor said, he was good for another quarter of a century. You ask Frank Crutchley, he heard him. Over at Pagford in the Pig and Whistle, and Mr. Robert what keeps the Crown in the village. He've heard him many a time." "Ah, well, that's as may be. T'ain't never safe to boast. The boast of heraldry. Well, I take it that'd be more in your lordship's line, but it all leads to the grave, as Gray's elegy has it. Still, he wasn't killed falling downstairs, because there's a bruise on his forehead where he went down and hit the bottom step." "Oh," said Peter, "and he was alive when he fell." "Yes," said Mr. Kirk, a little put out by being anticipated. "That's what I was leading up to. But there again, that don't prove nothing, because seemingly he didn't die straight off, according to what Dr. Craven makes out." "Shall I read that bit out, sir?" "No, don't bother with it, Joe. It's only a lot of rigmarole. I can explain to his lordship without all your onions and geraniums. What it comes to is this. Somebody hit him and bust his skull, and he lightly tumbled down and lost consciousness, concussed, as you might say. After a bit he'd come to, like as not, but he'd never know what hit him. Wouldn't remember a thing about it." "Nor he would," said Harriet eagerly. She knew that bit. In fact, she'd had to expound it in her latest detective novel but one. There'd be complete forgetfulness of everything immediately preceding the blow, and he might even pick himself up and feel all right for some time. "Except," put in Mr. Kirk, who liked a literal precision, "for a sore head. But generally speaking, that's correct, according to the doctor. He might walk about and do quite a bit for himself." "Such as locking the door behind the murderer?" "Exactly. Now there's the trouble." "Then," pursued Harriet, "he'd get giddy and drowsy, wouldn't he? Wander off to get a drink or call for help, and—" Memory suddenly showed her the open cellar door, yawning between the back door and the scullery, and pitch down the cellar steps and die there. That door was standing open when we arrived. I remember Mrs. Ruddle telling her Bert to shut it. "Ah, pity they didn't happen to look inside," grunted the superintendent. "Not as it'd have done the deceased any good. He'd been dead long enough. But if you'd have known, you could have kept the house in statu quo, as they say." "We could," said Peter, with emphasis, "but I don't mind telling you frankly that we were in no mood to." "No," said Mr. Kirk, meditatively. "I don't suppose you were. No, all things considered, it would have been inconvenient, I see that. But it's a pity, all the same, because you see we've got very little to go on, and that's a fact. The poor old chap might have been killed anywhere, upstairs, downstairs, in my lady's chamber." "No, no, Mother Goose," said Peter hastily. Not there, my child. Felicia Haymans. Let us pass on. How long did he live after he was hit?" Doctor says," put in the constable, "from half an hour to 1 hour, judging by the something or other." "Hemorrhage?" suggested Kirk, taking possession of the letter. "That's it. Hemorrhagic effusion into the cortex. Oh, that's a good one." "Bleeding in the brain," said Peter. "Good Lord, he had plenty of time. He may have been crushed outside the house altogether." "But when do you suppose it all happened?" demanded Harriet. She appreciated Peter's effort to exonerate the house from all share of the crime, and was annoyed with herself for having betrayed all sensibility on the subject. It was distracting for him. Her tone, in consequence, was determinedly offhand and practical. "That," said the superintendent, "is what we've got to find out. Some time last Wednesday night. Put in what the doctor says with the rest of the evidence. After dark, if them candles are anything to go by. And that means... We'd better have this chap Crutchley in. Seems like he might have been the last person to see the deceased alive." "Enter the obvious suspect," said Peter lightly. "The obvious suspect is always innocent," said Harriet in the same tone. "In books, my lady," said Mr. Kirk, with a little indulgent bow towards her, as who should say, "The ladies, God bless 'em, ha ha ha." Come, said Peter, "we must not introduce our professional prejudices into the case. How about it, Superintendent? Shall we make ourselves scarce?" "That's as you like, my lord. I'll be glad enough if you'd stay. You might give me a bit of help, seeing as you know the ropes, so to speak. Not but what it'll be a kind of busman's holiday for you," he finished up rather dubiously. "That's what I was thinking," said Harriet. "A busman's honeymoon." "Butchered to make a—" "Lord Byron!" cried Mr. Kirk a little too promptly. "Butchered to make a busman's—" "No, that don't seem right, somehow." "Try Roman," said Peter. "All right, we'll do our best. No objection to smoking in court, I take it? Where the devil did I put the matches?" Here you are, my lord," said Sullen. He produced a box and struck a light. Peter eyed him curiously and remarked, "Hello, you're left-handed." "For some things, my lord, not for writing." "Only for striking matches and handling Edinburgh rock?" "Left-handed?" said Kirk. "Why, so you are, Joe. I hope you ain't this tall left-handed murderer what we're looking out for." "No, sir," said the constable briefly. "Ah, pretty thing that'd be," said his superior with a hearty guffaw. "We shouldn't never hear the last of that. Now you hop out and get Crutchley. Nice lad he is," he went on, turning to Peter as Selden left the room. "Hard working, but no Sherlock Holmes, if you follow me. Slow in the uptake. I sometimes think his heart ain't rightly in his work these days. Married too young, that's what it is, and started a family, which is a handicap to a young officer." "Ah," said Peter, "all this matrimony is a sad mistake." He laid his hand on his wife's shoulder, while Mr. Kirk tactfully studied his notebook. Chapter 8. Pounds, Shillings, and Pence. Sailor. Faith decreed, it is to little end. His conscience too liberal, and he too niggardly, to part from anything may do thee good. Read. If prayers and fair entreaties will not serve, or make no battery in his flinty breast, I'll curse the carle, and see what that will do. Arden of Faversham. The gardener walked up to the table with a slightly belligerent air, as though he had an idea that the police were there for the sole purpose of preventing him from exercising his lawful right to obtain payment of £40. He admitted briefly, when questioned, that his name was Frank Crutchley, and that he was accustomed to attend to the garden 1 day a week at Tallboys for a stipend of 5 shillings per diem, putting in the rest of his time doing odd jobs of lorry driving and taxi work for Mr. Hancock at the garage at Pagford. "Saving up I was," said Crutchley with insistence, "to get a garage of my own. Only for that there £40 Mr. Noakes had off me." "Never mind that now," said the superintendent. "That's gone west, that has, and it's no use crying over spilt milk." Crutchley was about as much convinced by this assurance as were the allies on being informed by Mr. Keynes after the conclusion of the peace treaty that they might whistle for their indemnities since the money was not there. It is impossible for human nature to believe that money is not there. It seems so much more likely that the money is there and only needs bawling for. "We promised," affirmed Frank Crutchley in a dogged effort to overcome Mr. Kirk's extraordinary obtuseness, "that he'd let me have it when I came today." "Well," said Kirk, "I dare say he might have done if somebody hadn't butted in and brained him. You ought to have been smarter and got it out of him last week." This could be nothing but stupidity. Crutchley explained patiently he hadn't got it then. "Oh, hadn't he, though?" said the superintendent. "That's all you know about it. This was a staggerer. Crutchley turned white. "Cripes, you don't mean to tell me—" "Oh, yes, he had," said Kirk. "This information, if he knew anything about it, was going to loosen his witness's tongue for him and save him a deal of trouble." Crutchley turned with a frantic look to the other members of the party. Peter confirmed Kirk's statement with a nod. Harriet, who had known days when the loss of £40 would have meant greater catastrophe than Peter could ever suffer by the loss of 40,000, said sympathetically, "Yes, Crutchley, I'm afraid he had the money on him all the time." "What? He had the money? You found it on him?" "Well, we did," admitted the superintendent. "There's no call to make a secret of it." He waited for the witness to draw the obvious conclusion. "Mean to say if he hadn't been killed, I might have had my money?" "If you could have got in before Mr. McBride," said Harriet, with more honesty than consideration for Kirk's tactics. Crutchley, however, was not troubling his head about Mr. McBride. The murderer was the man who robbed him of his own, and he took no pains to conceal his feelings. "God, I'd like to—" Yes, said the superintendent, "we quite understand that, and now's your opportunity. Any facts you can give us?" "Facts? I've been done, that's what it is, and I—" "Look here, Crutchley," said Peter, "we know you've had a rotten deal, but that can't be helped. The man who killed Mr. Noakes has done you a bad turn, and he's the man we're after. Use your wits and see if you can't help us to get even with him." The quiet, incisive tone had its effect. A kind of illumination spread over Crutchley's features. "Thank you, my lord," said Kirk. "That's about the size of it, and put very plain. Now, my lad, we're sorry about your money, but it's up to you to give us a hand, see?" "Yes," said Crutchley, with an almost savage eagerness. "All right. What do you want to know?" "Well, first of all, when did you last see Mr. Noakes?" "Wednesday evening, same as I said. I finished up my work just before 6, and I come in here to do the pots. And when I'd done 'em, he give me 5 bob, same as usual. And that's when I started asking him for my 40 quid. "Where was that? In here?" No, in the kitchen. We always sat in there. I come out of here with the steps in my hand, and—" "Steps? Why the steps?" "Why, for that there cactus and the clock. I wind the clock every week. It's an 8-day. I can't reach either on 'em without the steps. I goes into the kitchen, like I was saying, to put the steps away, and there he was. He give me my money, half a crown and a bob, and 2 tanners and 6pence in coppers, if you want to be particular, all out of different pockets. He liked to make out he couldn't hardly lay hand on a penny, but I was used to that. And when he'd finished play-acting, I asked him for my £40. "I want that money," I says. Just so. You wanted the money for the garage. What did he say to that?" "Promised he'd let me have it next time I come. Now that's today. I might have known he never meant it. Wasn't the first time he'd promised, and then allus some excuse. But he promised faithful this time. The dirty old swine, and well he might, and him all set to skip with his pockets stuffed full of banknotes, the bleeder. Now come, said Kirk reprovingly, with a deprecatory glance at her ladyship. Mustn't use language. Was he alone in the kitchen when you went out? Yes. He wasn't the sort people dropped in for a chat with. I went off then, and that's the last I seed of him. You went off, repeated the superintendent, while Joe Sellen's hands travelled laboriously among the pothooks, and left him sitting in the kitchen. Now then. No, I didn't say that. He followed me down the passage, talking about giving me the money first thing in the morning, and then I heard him lock and bolt the door behind me. Which door? The back door. He mostly used that. Front door was always kept locked. Ah, is that a spring lock? No, mortise lock. He didn't believe in them Yale things. Don't take much to bust them off with a jemmy, he'd say. Ah, that's a fact, said Kirk. So that means the front door could only be opened with a key from inside or out. That's right. I should have thought you'd seen that for yourself if you'd looked. Mr. Kirk, who had indeed examined the fastenings of both doors with some care, merely inquired, Was the front door key ever left in the lock? No. He kept it on his bunch. It ain't a big one. It certainly wasn't in the lock last night, volunteered Peter. We got in that way with Miss Twitterton's key, and the lock was perfectly free." "Just so," said the superintendent. "Was there any other spare key that you know of?" Crutchley shook his head. "Mr. Noakes wouldn't go handing out keys by the bushel. Somebody might have got in, you see, and pinched something." "Ah. Well, now, to get back. You left the house last Wednesday night. What time?" "Dunno," said Crutchley thoughtfully. "Must have been getting on for 20 past, I reckon. Anyway, it was 10 past when I wound that there clock, and he keeps good time." "It's right now," said Kirk, glancing at his watch. Harriet's wristwatch confirmed this, and so did Joe Sellon's. Peter, after a blank gaze at his own watch, said, "Mine's stopped," in a tone which might have suggested that Newton's apple had been observed to fly upwards, or a BBC announcer heard to use a bawdy expression. Perhaps," suggested Harriet practically, "you forgot to wind it up." "I never forget to wind it up," said her husband indignantly. "You're quite right, though. I did. I must have been thinking of something else last night." "Very natural, I'm sure, in all the excitement," said Kirk. "Can you remember whether that there clock was going when you arrived?" The question distracted Peter from his own lapse of memory. He dropped his watch back into his pocket, unwound, and stared at the clock. "Yes," he said finally, "it was. I heard it ticking when we were sitting here. It was the most comfortable thing in the house." "It was right, too," said Harriet, "because you said something about it being past midnight, and I looked, and it said the same as my watch." Peter said nothing, but whistled a couple of bars almost inaudibly. Harriet remained imperturbable. 24 hours of matrimony had taught her that if one was going to be disturbed by sly allusions to Greenland's coast or anything else, one might live in a state of perpetual confusion. Crutchley said, "Of course it was going. It's a neat day, I tell you. And it was right enough this morning when I wound it. What's the odds, anyhow?" "Well, well," said Kirk, "we'll take it, then, that you left here sometime after 6:10, by that clock, which was right as near as makes no difference. What did you do next?" "Went straight to choir practice." "See here. Choir practice, eh? Ah. Ought to be easy enough to check up on that. What time's practice?" 6:30. "I was in good time. You can ask anybody." "Quite so," agreed Kirk. "All this is routine, you know, getting the time straight and so on. You left the house not earlier than 6:10 and not later than, say 6:25, to let you get to the church at 6:30, right? Now, as a matter of routine, what did you do after that?" "Vicar asked me to drive his car over to Pagford for him. He don't like driving himself after lighting up. He ain't so young as he was. I had my supper over there at the Pig and Whistle, and had a look at the darts match. Tom Puffett can tell you, he was there. Vicar give him a lift over." "Puffett, a darts player, eh?" inquired Peter pleasantly. "Ex-champion, and still throws a tidy dart. Ah, it's the power he puts behind it, no doubt. Black he stood as night, fierce as 10 furies, terrible as hell, and shook a dreadful dart." "Ha-ha!" cried Kirk, taken unaware and immensely tickled. "That's good. Hear that, Joe? That's good, that is. Black. He was black enough last time I saw him, halfway up the kitchen chimney, and shook a dreadful dart. I must tell him that. Worst of it is, I don't suppose he ever heard of Milton. Fierce as... Well, poor old Tom Puffett." The superintendent waited to roll the jest over again on his tongue before returning to his inquiry. Well, we'll see Tom Puffett presently. Did you bring Mr. Goodacre back?" "Yes," said Crutchley impatiently. He was not interested in John Milton. 10:30 I got him home, or just after. Then I went back to Pagford on my bike. I got in just on 11 and went to bed." "Where did you sleep? Hancock's garage?" "That's right. Along of their other chap, Williams. He'll tell you." Kirk was in the middle of extracting further particulars about Williams when the sooty face of Mr. Puffett poked itself in through the door. "Excuse me," said Mr. Puffett, "but I can't do nothing with this here pot. Will you have the reverend's gun, my lord, or shall I fetch the ladders afore it gets dark?" Kirk opened his mouth to reprove the intruder, but was suddenly overcome. "Black it stood as night," he muttered joyfully. This new way of applying quotations, not to edification, seemed to have caught his fancy. "Oh dear," said Harriet.
She glanced at Peter. "I wonder if we'd better leave it till tomorrow."
"I don't mind telling you, my lady," observed the sweep. "Mr. Bunter's fair put out, thinking he'll have to cook dinner on that there Persian oil stove."
"I'd better come and talk to Bunter," said Harriet. She felt she could not bear to see Bunter suffer any more. Besides, the men would probably get on better without her. As she went out, she heard Kirk call Puffet into the room.
Just a moment," said Kirk. "Crutchley here says he was at choir practice last Wednesday night from 6:30 on. Do you know anything about that?" "That's right, Mr. Kirk. We was both there. 6:30 to 7:30. Harvest Anthem. For his mercies still endure, ever faithful, ever sure."
Finding his notes less powerful than usual, Mr. Puffet cleared his throat.
"Oh, God. Been swallowing over the soot. That's what I've been doing. Ever faithful, ever sure. Yeah, that's quite correct." "And you see me round at the pig, too," said Crutchley. Of course I did. I'm not blind. You dropped me there and took Vicar on to the parish hall and come back not 5 minutes after for your supper. Bread and cheese you had, and 4.5 pints, 'cause I counted them. Drowned yourself one of these days, I reckon."
"Was Crutchley there all the time?" asked Kirk.
"Till closing, 10 o'clock. Then we had to go round and pick up Mr. Goodacre again. Whist drive was over at 10, but we had to wait, getting on 10 minutes while he had a chat with old Miss Moody. Oh, how that woman do clack, to be sure. Then he come back with us. That's right, ain't it, Frank?" "That's right. And," pursued Mr. Puffet with a large wink, "if it's me you've got your eye on, you can ask Ginny what time I got home. George, too. Really vexed Ginny was at me sitting down to tell George about the match. But there, she's expecting her fourth, and it makes her fretchety like. I tell her it ain't no good blaming her dad, but I reckon she got to take it out of George somehow." "Very good," said Superintendent. "That's all I want to know." "Right," said Mr. Puffet. I'll be seeing about them ladders, then." He retired promptly, and Kirk again turned to Crutchley. "Well, that seems straight enough. You left, call it 6:20, and didn't come back that night. You left deceased alone in the house, with the back door locked and bolted, and the front locked so far as you know. How about the windows?" "Shut and locked 'em all afore I went. Burglar-proof catches, you can see they have. Mr. Noakes didn't set much store by fresh air." Said Peter. "He seems to have been a careful bird. By the way, Superintendent, did you find the front door key on the body?" "Here's his bunch," said Kirk. Peter pulled Miss Twitterton's key from his pocket, looked over the bunch, picked out its counterpart, and said, "Yes, here you are." He laid the two side by side on his palm, examined them thoughtfully with a lens, and finally handed the whole thing over to Kirk, remarking, "Nothing there, so far as I can see." Kirk scrutinized the keys silently, and then asked Crutchley, "Did you come back here any time during the week?" "No. Wednesday's my day. Miss Hancock gives me Wednesdays from 11 o'clock on, and Sundays, of course, but I wasn't here Sunday. I went to London to see a young lady." "Are you a London man?" asked Peter. "No, my lord, no, but I worked there once and I got friends there." Peter nodded. "And you can't give us any information? Can't think of anybody who might have come to see Mr. Noakes that night? Anybody who might have had a grudge against him?" "Oh, I might think of plenty of them," said Crutchley with emphasis, "but nobody what you might call special." Kirk was about to make a gesture of dismissal when Peter put in a question. "Do you know anything about a note case Mr. Noakes lost some time ago?" Kirk, Crutchley, and Selden all stared at him. Peter grinned. "No, I wasn't born with second sight. Mrs. Ruddle was eloquent on the subject. What can you tell us about that?" "Well, I know he made a hell of a fuss about it, that's all. £10 he had in it, or so he said. If he'd lost £40 like me, now that'll do," said Kirk. "Have we any information about that, Joe?" No, sir, no, except it wasn't found. We made out he must have dropped it out of his pockets in the road." "All the same," put in Crutchley, "he had new locks put on the doors and the windows done too. 2 years ago, that was. You asked Mr. Ruddle about it." 2 years ago," said Kirk. Well, it don't seem to have much connection with this here.
It explains, perhaps, said Peter, why he was so careful about locking up.
Oh, yes, of course, agreed the superintendent. Well, all right, Crutchley, that'll do for the moment. Stay about in case you're wanted. It's my day here, said Crutchley. I'll be working in the garden.
Kirk watched the door close behind him.
Don't seem as if it could be him. Him and Puffet are alibis for one another. Puffet? Puffet is his own best alibi. You've only got to look at him.
The man of upright soul and humour placid needs no blunt instrument nor prussic acid. Horace. Wimsey's translation.
Then Puffet's word is enough to let out Crutchley. Not but what he mightn't have done it later on. Doctor only says dead about a week. Suppose Crutchley did it the next day. Not very likely. When Mrs. Ruddle came in the morning, she couldn't get in. Ah, yeah, that's true. Well, we'll have to check on the alibi with this chap Williams at Pugford. He might have come back and done the job after 11. He might. Only remember, Noakes hadn't gone to bed. How about earlier, say 6 o'clock before he left? Ah, don't fit in with the candles. Ah, I was forgetting about them. But you know you could light candles at 6 o'clock on purpose to create an alibi. I suppose you could, agreed Kirk with deliberation. He was apparently unused to dealing with criminals of so much subtlety as that would imply. He ruminated for a moment and then suggested, "But them eggs and that cocoa." "I've known even that done, too. I've known a murderer sleep in 2 beds and eat 2 breakfasts in order to lend verisimilitude to an otherwise unconvincing narrative." "Gilbert and Sullivan," said the superintendent a little hopelessly.
"Mostly Gilbert, I fancy. It's more likely, if Crutchley did it, that it was done then, because I don't see old Noakes letting in Crutchley after dark. Why should he? Unless Crutchley did have a key, after all."
"Ah," said Kirk.
He swivelled round heavily in his chair and looked Peter in the face.
"What was you looking for in them keys, my lord?"
"The traces of wax in the wards."
"Oh," said Kirk.
"If a duplicate was made," went on Peter, "it was made within the last 2 years. Difficult to trace, but not impossible, especially when people have friends in London."
Kirk scratched his head. "That'll be a nice job," he said. "But see here, the way I look at it is this. If Crutchley did it, how did he come to miss all that money? That's the thing I can't get over. That don't look reasonable to me."
"Yeah, you're quite right. It's the most puzzling thing about the case whoever committed the murder. It almost looks as though it wasn't done for money. But it's not easy to see any other motive."
"That's the funny thing about it," said Kirk.
"By the way, if Mr. Noakes had had any money to leave, who would have come in for it?"
"Ah!" The superintendent's face brightened. "We've got that. Found this bit of a will in that old desk in the kitchen." He produced the paper from his pocket and spread it out. "After payment of my just debts," cynical blighter, a fine fat legacy to leave anyone, "all I die possessed of to my niece and sole surviving relative, Agnes Twitterton."
That surprise you? Not at all. Why should it? But Kirk, slow as he seemed, had seen Peter's quick frown, and now pressed home his advantage.
"When this Jewbird McBride started blowing the gaff, what did Miss Twitterton say?"
Well," said Peter, "she went off the deep end, naturally."
"Naturally. Seemed a bit of a blow to her, eh?"
"Well, not more than you might expect. Who witnessed the will, by the way?"
"Simon Goodacre and John Jellyfield. He's the doctor from Pagford. It's all in order." "What did Miss Twitterton say when your man discovered the body?"
"Well, she shrieked a bit and so on, and went off into hysterics."
"Did she say anything particular besides shrieking?"
Peter was conscious of a curious reluctance. Theoretically, he was quite as ready to hang a woman as a man, but the memory of Miss Twitterton frenziedly clinging to Harriet was disturbing to him. He was tempted to feel with Kirk that marriage was a handicap to a young officer.
"See here, my lord," said Kirk, his ox eyes mild but implacable, "I've heard 1 or 2 things from these other people."
"Then," retorted Peter, "why don't you ask them?"
"I'm going to. Joe, ask Mr. McBride to step here a minute." "Now, my lord, you're a gentleman, and you've got your feelings. I know all that, and it does you credit. But I'm a police officer, and I can't afford to indulge in feelings. They're a privilege of the upper classes." "Upper classes be damned," said Peter. This stung him all the more that he knew he deserved it. "Now, McBride," went on Kirk cheerfully, "he's no class at all. If I asked you, you'd tell the truth, but it might hurt you. Now I can get it out of McBride, and it won't hurt him in the least." "I see," said Peter. "Painless extraction of speciality." He walked up to the fire and kicked the logs moodily. Mr. McBride came in with great alacrity. His face expressed that the sooner all this was over, the sooner to town. He'd already given the police the details of the financial situation, and was straining like a greyhound at the official leash. "Oh, Mr. McBride, there's just one other thing. Did you happen to notice what sort of effect the discovery of the body had upon the family and friends, so to speak?" "Well," said Mr. McBride, "they were upset. Who wouldn't be? A silly question to keep a man waiting about for. Remember anything special said?" "Oh, said McBride, "I'll get you. Well, now, the gardener chap, he went as white as a sheet, he did, and the old gentleman was badly put about. The niece had hysterics, but she didn't seem as much surprised as the rest, did she?" He appealed to Peter, who avoided his sharp eye by strolling over to the window and gazing out at the dahlias. "What do you mean by that?" "Well, when the servant came in and said they'd found Mr. Noakes, she yelled out at once, 'Oh, Uncle's dead.'" "Did she now?" said Kirk. Peter swung round on his heel. "Now, that is not quite fair, McBride. Anybody could tell that from Bunter's manner. I know I could." "Could you?" said McBride. "You didn't seem in any hurry to believe it." He glanced at Kirk, who asked, "Did Miss Twitterton say anything else?" "She said, Uncle's dead and all the money's gone, just like that. Then she had the jim-jams. Nothing like pounds, shillings and pence for going straight to the heart, is there?" "Nothing," said Peter. "You, if I recollect rightly, asked whether they'd found any money on the corpse." "Quite right," admitted Mr. McBride. "He was no relation of mine, you see, was he?" Peter worsted at every thrust, lowered his weapon, and admitted defeat. "The legal profession," he said, "must present you with a comprehensive picture of Christian family life. What do you think of it?" "Not much," replied Mr. McBride succinctly. He turned back to the table. "I say, Mr. Superintendent, are you going to want me any more? I've got to get back to town." "That's okay. We've got your address. Good morning, Mr. McBride, and thanks very much." As the door shut behind him, Kirk transferred his glance to Peter. "That right, my lord?" "Quite right." "Ah, well, I think we'll have to see Miss Twitterton." "I'll get my wife to fetch her down," said Peter, and escaped. Mr. Kirk sat back in Merlin's seat and rubbed his hands thoughtfully. "That's a real nice gentleman, Joe," said Mr. Kirk. "Straight out of the top drawer. Pleasant and easy as kiss me hand. Well educated, too. But he sees which way the wind's blowing, and he don't like it. Small blame to him." "But," objected the constable, "he can't think Aggie Twitterton coshed old Oakes on the head with a mallet. She's a little slip of a thing." "You never know, my lad. The female of the species is deadlier than the male. That's Rudyard Kipling. He knows that, though it's again his upbringing to say so. Not but what he'd have made it sound a lot better if he had said it, instead of leaving it to McBride. But there, he couldn't lay tongue to it, I suppose. Besides, he knew well enough I'd have it out of McBride in the end." "Well, he ain't done her much good, as I can see." "Them sort of feelings," pronounced Mr. Kirk, "commonly don't do much good except to complicate things. But they're pretty, and if taken the right way, harmless. You've got to learn to get round 'em when you're dealing with gentry, and remember this, what they don't say is more important than what they do say, especially when they got good brains, like this here gentleman has. He sees well enough that if Noakes was killed for what he had to leave, but he hadn't nothing to leave. I know that, but she didn't. Aggie Twitterton didn't know. And if he was murdered for what he had to leave, that'd explain why the £600 wasn't took off the body. Maybe she didn't know it was there, and if she did, she didn't have to take it, because it'd all be hers in the end. Use your head, Joe Selden." Peter, in the meantime, had caught Mr. McBride on the doorstep. "How'd you get back?" "Lord knows," said Mr. McBride frankly. "I came by train to Great Pagford and took the bus on. There's no bus handy. I'll have to get a lift. I wouldn't have believed there were places like this within 50 miles of London. Beats me how people can live in them. But it's all a matter of taste, ain't it?" "Bunter could take you in the car to Pagford," said Peter. "They won't want him again for a bit. Sorry you should have been dumped into all this." Mr. McBride was grateful and said so. "It's all in the day's work," he added. "You're the ones that come off worst, in one way, you and her ladyship. I never saw much to fancy in these 3x4 villages myself. Think it's the little woman, do you? Well, you can't be sure. But in our way of business we do have to keep our eyes peeled when it comes to relations, particularly if there's money in it. There's some people who won't even make a will. Say it's like signing their own death warrant. And they ain't far out. But look here, this chap Noakes was pretty well up against it, wasn't he? He may have been doing some funny stuff on the side. I've known men get bumped off for other things besides money. Well, so long. My respects to her ladyship, and much obliged." Bunter brought round the car, and he hopped in, waving a friendly gesture. Peter caught Harriet and explained what was wanted. "Poor little Twitters," said Harriet. "Are you going to be there?" "No, I'm going out for a breath of air. I'll come back presently." "What's the matter?" "Kirk hasn't been unpleasant, surely?" "Oh, no. He handled me with kid gloves on. Showed all the proper consideration for my rank and refinement and other inferiorities. My own fault, I asked for it. Oh, golly, here's the vicar. What does he want?" "They asked him to come back. Go on out the back way, Peter. I'll tackle him." Kirk and Selden from the window had watched Mr. McBride's departure. "Hadn't I ought to fetch Shaggy Twitterton down myself?" suggested Selden. "His lordship will maybe tell his wife to give her the tip." "The trouble with you, Joe," replied the superintendent, "is you ain't got no pussicology, as they call it. They wouldn't do a thing like that, neither of 'em. They ain't compounding no felonies, nor yet obstructing the law. All that's the matter is, he don't like hurting women, and she don't like hurting him. But they won't either on 'em put a finger to stop it, because that sort of thing ain't done. And when things ain't done, they won't do 'em, and that's the long and the short of it." Having thus laid down the code of behaviour for the nobility and gentry, Mr. Kirk blew his nose and resumed his seat, whereupon the door opened to admit Harriet and Mr. Goodacre. Chapter 9. Times and Seasons. "Dost thou know what reputation is? I'll tell thee. To small purpose, since the instruction comes now too late. You have shook hands with reputation, and made him invisible." John Webster, The Duchess of Malty. The Reverend Simon Goodacre blinked nervously when confronted by the two officers, drawn up, as it were, in battle array, and Harriet's brief announcement on her way upstairs that he had something to say to you, Superintendent, did little to set him at ease. "Dear me, well, yes. I came back to see if you wanted me for anything. As you suggested, you know, as you suggested, and to tell Miss Twitterton, but I see she's not here. Well, only that I had seen Lugg about the, oh, dear me, the coffin. There must be a coffin, of course. I'm not acquainted with the official procedure in such circumstances, but no doubt a coffin will have to be provided." "Certainly," said Kirk. "Oh, yes, thank you. I had supposed so. I have referred Lugg to you because I imagine the body is no longer in the house." "It's over at the Crown," said the superintendent. "The inquest will have to be held there." "Oh dear," said Mr. Goodacre. "The inquest. Oh yes." "The coroner's office will give all the usual facilities." Yes, thank you. Crutchley spoke to me as I came up the path." "What did he say?" "Well, I think he thinks he might be suspected." "What makes him think that?" "Oh, dear me," said Mr. Goodacre, I fear I'm putting my foot in it. He didn't say he did think it. I only thought he might think it from what he said. But I assure you, Superintendent, that I can confirm his alibi in every particular. He was at choir practice from 6:30 to 7:30, and then he took me over to Pagford for the whist drive and brought me back here at 10:30. So you see, That's all right, sir. If an alibi's wanted for them times, you and him's out of it." "I am out of it?" exclaimed Mr. Goodacre. "Oh, bless my soul, Superintendent. Only my joke, sir." Mr. Goodacre seemed to find the joke in but poor taste. He replied, however, mildly, "Yes, yes. Well, I hope I may assure Crutchley that it's all right. He is a young man of whom I have a very high opinion. So keen and industrious. You mustn't attach too much importance to his chagrin about the £40. It's a considerable sum for a man in his position." "Don't you worry about that, sir," said Kirk. "Very glad to have your confirmation of those times." "Yes, yes. Well, I thought I'd better mention it. Now, is there anything else I can do to help?"
"Thank you very much, sir. I don't think there is. You spent Wednesday night at home, I take it, after 10:30?
"Oh, why, of course," said the vicar,
not at all relishing his tendency to harp upon his movements. "My wife and my servant can substantiate my statement. But you scarcely suppose—" "No, we ain't got to supposing things yet, sir. That comes later. This is all routine. You didn't call here at any time during the last week by any chance?"
"Oh, no. Mr. Noakes was away."
"Oh, you knew he was away, did you, sir?"
No. At least, well, I suppose so. That is to say, yes, I called here on the Thursday morning, but got no answer, so I supposed he was away, as he sometimes was. In fact, I fancy Mrs. Ruddle told me so. Yes, that was it."
"The only time you called?"
Dear me, yes. It was only a little matter of a subscription. In fact, that was what I came about today. I was passing by, and I saw a notice on the gate asking for bread and milk to be delivered, so I supposed he had returned."
"Ah, yes. When you came on Thursday, you didn't notice anything funny about the house?"
"Oh, goodness me, no. Nothing unusual at all. What would there be to notice?"
"Well," began Kirk, but after all, what could he expect this short-sighted old gentleman to notice? Signs of a struggle? Fingerprints on a door? Footmarks on the path? Scarcely. Mr. Goodacre would possibly have noticed a full-sized corpse if he'd happened to trip over it, but probably nothing smaller. He accordingly thanked and dismissed the vicar, who, once more observing that he could fully account for Crutchley's movements and his own after 6:30, blundered vaguely out again, murmuring a series of agitated good afternoons as he went. "Well," said Kirk. He frowned. "What makes the old gentleman so sure those are the essential times? We don't know they are." "No, sir," said Selden. "Seems very excited about it. It can't hardly be him. Well, come to think of it, he's tall enough. He's taller nor what you are. Pretty well as tall as Mr. Noakes was, I reckon." "I'm sure," said the constable, "it couldn't be Vicar, sir." "Isn't that just what I'm saying? I suppose Crutchley must have got the idea of the times being important from us questioning so closely about them. It's a hard life," added Mr. Kirk plaintively. "If you ask questions, you tell the witness what you're after. If you don't ask 'em, you can't find out anything. And just when you think you're getting onto something, you come slap up against the judge's rules."
"Yes, sir," said Selden respectfully.
He rose as Harriet led Miss Twitterton in and brought forward another chair.
"Oh, please," exclaimed Miss Twitterton faintly, "please don't leave me, Lady Peter."
No, said Harriet. Mr. Kirk hastened to reassure the witness. "Sit down, Miss Twitterton. There's nothing to be alarmed about. Now, first of all, I understand you know nothing about your uncle's arrangements with Lord Peter Wimsey. Selling the house, I mean, and so on." "No, just so. Now, when had you seen him last?"
"Oh, not for—" Miss Twitterton paused and counted the fingers of both hands carefully. "Not for about 10 days. I looked in last Saturday after morning service. I mean, of course, last Sunday week. I come over, you see, to play the organ for the dear vicar. It's a tiny church, of course, and not many people. Nobody in Pakenham plays the organ, and, of course, I am delighted to help in any way. And I called on Uncle then, and he seemed quite as usual, and that's the last time I saw him. Oh, dear." Were you aware that he was absent from home ever since last Wednesday?"
But he wasn't absent," exclaimed Miss Twitterton. "He was here all the time."
Quite so," said the superintendent. "Did you know he was here and not absent?"
"Well, of course not. He's often away. He usually told me. But it was quite an ordinary thing for him to be at Broxford. If I had known, I shouldn't have thought anything about it. But I didn't know anything about it."
"Anything about what?"
About anything. Nobody told me he wasn't here, so I thought he was here, and so he was, of course."
"If you'd been told the house was shut up and Mrs. Ruddle couldn't get in, you wouldn't have been surprised or uneasy?"
"Oh, no. No, it often happened. I should have thought he was at Broxford."
"You have a key for the front door, haven't you?"
"Oh, yes, and the back door, too."
Miss Twitterton fumbled in a capacious pocket of the old-fashioned sort.
"But I never use the back door key because it's always bolted.
The door, I mean."
She pulled out a large key-ring. "I gave them both to Lord Peter last night, off this bunch. I always keep them on the ring with my own. They never leave me. Except last night, of course, when Lord Peter had them."
Said Kirk.
He produced Peter's 2 keys.
"Are these the ones?"
Well, they must be, mustn't they, if Lord Peter gave them to you?"
"You haven't ever left the front door key to anybody?"
"Oh, dear, no," protested Miss Twitterton. "Not anybody. If Uncle was away and Frank Crutchley wanted to get in on Wednesday morning, he always came to me, and I went over with him and unlocked the door for him. Uncle was ever so particular. And besides, I should want to go myself and see that the rooms were all right. In fact, if Uncle William was at Broxford, I used to come over most days."
"But on this occasion you didn't know he was away?"
"No, I didn't. That's what I keep on telling you. I didn't know. So of course I didn't come. And he wasn't away."
"Exactly. Now you're sure you never left these keys about, where they might be pinched or borrowed?"
"No, never," replied Miss Twitterton earnestly, as though, thought Harriet, she asked nothing better than to twist a rope for her own neck. Surely she must see that the key to the house was the key to the problem. Was it possible for any innocent person to be quite as innocent as that? The superintendent ploughed on with his questions unmoved.
"Where do you keep them at night?"
"Always in my bedroom. The keys and dear mother's silver teapot and Aunt Sophie's cruet that was a wedding present to Grandpa and Grandma. I take them up with me every night and put them on the little table by my bed, with the dinner bell handy in case of fire. And I'm sure nobody would come in when I was asleep, because I always put a deck chair across the head of the staircase."
"You brought the dinner bell down when you came to let us in," said Harriet, vaguely corroborative.
Her attention was distracted by the sight of Peter's face peering in through the diamond panes of the lattice. She waved him a friendly gesture. Presumably he'd walked off his attack of self-consciousness and was getting interested again.
"A deck chair?"
Kirk was asking. "To trip up a burglar," explained Miss Twitterton very seriously. "It's a splendid thing. You see, while he was getting all tangled up and making a noise, I should hear him and ring the dinner bell out of the window for the police." "Dear me," said Harriet. Peter's face had vanished. Perhaps he was coming in. "How dreadfully ruthless of you, Miss Twitterton. The poor man might have fallen over it and broken his neck." "What man?" "The burglar." "But, dear Lady Peter, I am trying to explain. There never was a burglar."
"Well," said Kirk, "it doesn't look as if anybody else could have got at the keys. Now, Miss Twitterton, about these money difficulties of your uncle's."
Oh, dear," broke in Miss Twitterton with unfeigned emotion. "I knew nothing about those. It's terrible. It gave me such a shock. I thought, we all thought, Uncle was ever so well off." Peter had come in so quietly that only Harriet noticed him. He remained near the door, winding his watch and setting it by the clock on the wall. Obviously he had come back to normal, for his face expressed only an alert intelligence.
"Did he make a will, do you know?"
Kirk dropped the question out casually. The tell-tale sheet of paper lay concealed under his notebook. "Oh, yes," said Miss Twitterton. "Yes, I'm sure he made a will. Not that it would have mattered, I suppose, because I'm the only one of the family left. But I'm certain he told me he'd made one.
He always said, 'Now don't you be in a hurry, Aggie. I can't help you now, because it's all tied up in the business, but it'll come to you after I am dead.'"
"I see. You never thought he might change his mind?"
"Why, no. Who else should he leave it to? I'm the only one." "I suppose now there won't be anything."
"I'm afraid it doesn't look like it."
"Oh, dear. Was that what he meant when he said it was tied up in the business? That there wasn't any?"
"That's what it very often does mean," said Harriet. "Then that's what—" began Miss Twitterton and stopped. "That's what?" prompted the superintendent.
Nothing," said Miss Twitterton miserably. "Only something I thought of, something private. But he said once something about being short and people not paying their bills. Oh, what have I done? However can I explain?"
"What?" demanded Kirk again.
Nothing," repeated Miss Twitterton hastily, "only it sounds so silly of me."
Harriet received the impression that this was not what Miss Twitterton had originally meant to say.
"He borrowed a little sum off me once. Not much, but of course I hadn't got much. Oh, dear, I'm afraid it looks dreadful to be thinking about money just now, but I did think I'd have a little for my old age, and times are so hard, and well, there's the rent of my cottage, and—"
She quavered on the verge of tears. Harriet said confusedly, "Don't worry. I'm sure something will turn up." Kirk could not resist. "Mr. Micawber," he said, with a sort of relief. A faint echo behind him drew his attention to Peter, and he glanced round. Miss Twitterton hunted wildly for a handkerchief amid a pocketful of bast, pencils, and celluloid rings for chickens' legs, which came popping out in a shower.
"I'd counted on it rather specially," sobbed Miss Twitterton. "Oh, I'm sorry. Please don't pay any attention."
Kirk cleared his throat. Harriet, who was, as a rule, good at handkerchiefs, discovered to her annoyance that on this particular morning she had provided herself only with an elegant square of linen, suitable for receiving such rare and joyful drops as might be expected on one's honeymoon. Peter came to the rescue with what might have been a young flag of truce. "It's quite clean," he said cheerfully. "I always carry a spare." "The devil you do," said Harriet to herself. "You are too well trained by half." Miss Twitterton buried her face in the silk and snuffled in a dismal manner, while Joe Sellon studiously consulted the back pages of his shorthand notes. The situation threatened to prolong itself. "Shall you want Miss Twitterton any more, Mr. Kirk?" Harriet ventured at length. "Because I really think—"
Well," said the superintendent, "if Miss Twitterton wouldn't mind telling us, just as a matter of form, you understand, where she was last Wednesday evening."
Miss Twitterton came quite briskly out of her handkerchief.
"But Wednesday is always choir practice," she announced, with an air of astonishment that anyone should ask so simple a question.
"Ah, yes," agreed Kirk. "And I suppose you'd quite naturally pop in on your uncle when that was over."
"Oh, no," said Miss Twitterton. "No, indeed I didn't. No, I went home to supper. Wednesday's my busy night, you know."
"That's so," said Kirk.
Yes, of course, because of market on Thursday. Why, I had 6 fowls to kill and pluck before I went to bed. It may be ever so late. Mr. Goodacre, he's always so kind, he's often said he knew it was inconvenient having the practice on Wednesday, but it happens to suit some of the men better, and so you see—"
"6 to kill and pluck," said Kirk thoughtfully, as though estimating the time that this would take. Harriet looked at the meek Miss Twitterton in consternation. "You don't mean to say you kill them yourself?"
"Oh, yes," said
Miss Twitterton brightly.
"Oh, it's so much easier than you would think, when you're used to it."
Kirk burst into a guffaw, and Peter, seeing that his wife was disposed to attach overmuch importance to the matter, said in an amused tone, "My dear girl, wringing necks is only a knack. It doesn't need strength." He twisted his hands in a quick pantomime, and Kirk, either genuinely forgetting the errand he was on, or of malice prepense, added, "That's right." He tightened an imaginary noose about his own bull neck. "Ring 'em or string 'em up. It's the sharp jerk that does it." His head flopped sideways suddenly, sickeningly, Miss Twitterton gave a squeak of alarm. For the first time, perhaps, she realized where all this had to end. Harriet was angry, and her face showed it. Men! When they got together, they were all alike, even Peter. For a moment he and Kirk stood together on the far side of a chasm, and she hated them both. "Steady on, Super," said Wimsey. "We're alarming the ladies." "Oh, dear! Oh, that'll never do." Kirk was jovial, but the brown ox eyes were as watchful as the grey. "Well, thank you, Miss Twitterton. I think that's all for the moment." "That's all right, then." Harriet got up. "It's all over. Come along and see how Mr. Puffet is getting on with the kitchen chimney." She pulled Miss Twitterton to her feet and steered her out of the room. As Peter opened the door for them, she darted a reproachful glance at him, but, as with Lancelot and Guinevere, their eyes met, and hers fell. "Oh, and my lady," said the superintendent, unmoved, "would you be so kind as to tell Mrs. Ruddle she's wanted? We must get those times straightened out a bit," he went on, addressing himself to Selden, who grunted and took out a knife to sharpen his pencil. "Well," said Peter, in a tone almost of challenge. She was quite frank about that. "Yes, my lord. She knew about it all right. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing." "Not knowledge, learning," Peter corrected him peevishly. "A little learning. Alexander Pope." "Is that so?" replied Mr. Kirk, not at all perturbed. "I must make a note of that." It don't look as though nobody else could have got hold of the keys, but you never know." I think she was telling the truth. "I reckon there's several kinds of truth, my lord. There's truth as far as you knows it, and there's truth as far as you're asked for it. But they don't represent the whole truth, not necessarily. For instance, I never asked that little lady if she locked up the house after someone else, did I? All I said was, when did you last see your your uncle, see?" "Yes, I see. Personally, I always prefer not to have a key to the house in which they've discovered the body." "There's that about it," admitted Kirk. "But there's circumstances in which you might rather it was you than somebody else, if you take my meaning. And there's times when— What do you suppose she meant when she said, 'What had she done,' eh? Maybe it come to her she might have left them keys about, accidental, on purpose, or maybe— That was about the money." "So it was. And maybe she thought of something else she'd done as wasn't much use to her nor anybody, as it turned out. Something she was hiding there, if you ask me. If she'd been a man, I'd have got it out of her fast enough. But women, they get howling and sniffing, and you can't do nothing with them." "True," said Peter, and felt in his turn a momentary resentment against the whole sex, including his wife. After all, hadn't she, more or less, ticked him off for the matter of neck-wringing? And the lady who now entered, rubbing her hands on her apron and crying in self-important tones, "Did you want me, mister?" There was nothing in her to thrill to music the silent string of chivalry. Kirk, however, knew where he was with the Mrs. Ruddles of this life, and attacked the position confidently. "Yes. We wanted to fix up a bit more exactly about the time of this murder. Now, Crutchley says he saw Mr. Noakes alive and well on Wednesday evening about 6:20. You'd gone home by then, I suppose?" "Yes, I had. I only came to Mr. Noakes mornings. I wasn't in the house after dinner time." "And you came up next morning and found the place shut up?" "That's right. I knocks hard on both doors. Him being a bit deaf, I always knocks hard, and then I gives a shout like under his bedroom window. And then I knocks again. Nothing come of it, and I says, 'Drat the man,' I says, 'he's gone off to Broxford,' thinking he'd took the 10 o'clock bus the night before. There, I says, he might have told me, and me not paid for last week neither." "What else did you do?" "Nothing. There wasn't nothing to do. Only tell the baker and the milkman not to call, and the newspaper, and leave word at the post office to bring his letters down to me. Only there wasn't no letters, only two, and they was bills, so I didn't send them on." "Ah," said Peter. "That's the right way with bills. There, as the poet ungrammatically observes, there let them lay like the goose with the golden eggs." Mr. Kirk found this quotation confusing and refused to pursue it. "Didn't you think of sending over to Miss Twitterton? She usually came down when Mr. Noakes was away. You must have been surprised not to see her." "It ain't my place to go sending for people if they don't choose to come," said Mrs. Ruddle. "If Mr. Noakes had wanted Aggie Twitterton, he could have told her.
Leastways, that's how I thought about it. Him being dead, I see now, of course, he couldn't, but I wasn't to know that, was I? And I was inconvenienced enough not having had me money. You don't expect me to go sending 2 miles for people as if I hadn't enough to do without that. Nor wasting good stamps on 'em neither. And what's more, said Mrs. Ruddle with some energy, I says to myself, if he ain't said nothing to me about going, maybe he ain't told Aggie Twitton neither. And I don't want to interfere in other folks' business, and don't you think it. Ah, said Mr. Coke. Mean to say you thought he might have had some reason for wanting to leave the place quiet-like? Well, he might and he mightn't. That's the way I looked at it, see? Of course there was my weekly money, but there wasn't no hurry for that. Aggie Twitterton would have paid me if I asked her. Of course, said Kirk. I suppose you didn't think of asking her on Sunday when she came over to play the organ in church. Me? Said Mrs. Ruddle, quite affronted. I'm chapel. They're out and gone by the time we finish. Not but what I have been to church now and again, but there ain't nothing to show for it. Up and down, as if one's knees wasn't wore out with scrubbing on a weekday. And a poor little bit of a sermon with no heart in it. Mr. Goodacre's a very kind gentleman and friendly to all. I ain't saying a word against him, but I am chapel and always was, and that's the other end of the village. Which by the time I was back here, they've all gone home, and Aggie Twitton on her bicycle. So you see, I couldn't catch her, not if I wanted ever so. Of course you couldn't, said Kirk. All right. Well, you didn't try to let Miss Twitterton know. I suppose you mentioned in the village that Mr. Noakes was away? I dare say I did, admitted Mrs. Ruddle. Wasn't nothing out of the way. You told us, put in Peter, that he'd gone by the bus at 10 o'clock. So I thought he had, said Miss Ruddle. And that would seem natural, so there would be no inquiries. Did anybody call for Mr. Noakes during the week? Only Mr. Goodacre. I see him on the Thursday morning poking about the place, and he sees me and hollers out, Is Mr. Noakes away? That's right, I said. Gone over to Roxford, I says. And he says, I'll call another day, he says. I don't remember as nobody come after him. Then last night, resumed Kirk, when you let this lady and gentleman in, did you find everything as usual? That's right. Excepting these dirty supper things on the table where he left them. He allus had his supper at 7:30 regular. Then he set in the kitchen with his paper till he came in here for the news at 9:30. Very regular he was, a very regular sort of man. Kirk beamed. This was the kind of information he was looking for. So, he had his supper, but his bed hadn't been slept in. No, it hadn't. But of course I put clean sheets for the lady and gentleman. I hope I knows what's proper. Them, explained Mrs. Ruddle, anxious to make things clear, was the week before sheets, what was all dried and ready Wednesday, but I couldn't take 'em in along of the house being shut up. So I had them all put aside neat in my kitchen, and I didn't have to do more than put them to the fire in a minute, and there they was, all aired and fit for the King and Queen of England. Ah, well, that helps a lot, said Kirk. Mr. Noakes ate his supper at 7:30, so presumably he was alive then. He glanced at Peter, but Peter was offering no further embarrassing questions about murderers who ate their victims' suppers, and the superintendent was encouraged to proceed. He didn't go to bed, so that gives us... When did he usually go to bed, Mrs. Ruddle, do you know? 11 o'clock, Mr. Kirk. Regular as clockwork. We'd switch off the wireless, and I see his candle go upstairs to bed. I can see his bedroom from my back window, plain enough. Ah. Now, Mrs. Ruddle, just cast your mind back to Wednesday night. Do you recollect seeing his candle go upstairs to bed? Ah, well there, exclaimed Mrs. Ruddle. Now you comes to mention it, Mr. Kirk, I did not. Which I remember saying to my Bert only the next day. There, I says, if I'd only kept awake, I might have known he'd gone off, along of seeing his bedroom window dark. But there, I says, I was that wore out I dropped off the moment my head was on the pillar. Oh, well, said Kirk, disappointed, it don't really matter. Seeing his bed wasn't slept in, it's likely he was downstairs when... Thank God, thought Peter, not in my lady's chamber. Mrs. Ruddle interrupted with a sharp screech. Oh, law, Mr. Kirk, there now. Have you thought of something? Mrs. Ruddle had,
and her expression, as her eyes wandered from Kirk to Selden and then to Peter, indicated that it was not only important but alarming. "Why, of course. I don't know how it didn't come into my head afore, but I've been that mothered with all these dreadful things happening. Course, come to think of it, if he wasn't off the bus, then he must have been dead afore 9:30. The constable's hand paused in its note-taking. Kirk said sharply, "What makes you think that?" "Why, his wireless wasn't a-working, and I says to Bert, 'Look, just a minute. What's all this about the wireless?' Well, Mr. Kirk, if Mr. Noakes had been here alive, he wouldn't have missed the 9:30 news, not if he was ever so. He set great store by the last news, poor soul, though what good it done him I don't know. And I recollect saying to Bert last Wednesday night as ever was, 'Funny thing,' I says, 'Mr. Noakes ain't got his wireless going tonight. That ain't like him,' I says." "But you couldn't hear the wireless from your cottage with all those doors and windows shut?" Mrs. Ruddle licked her lips. "Well, I won't deceive you, Mr. Kirk." She swallowed, and then went on as volubly as ever. Her eye avoided the superintendent's and fixed itself on Joe Selden's pencil. "I did just run over here a few minutes after the half-hour to borrow a drop of paraffin from his shed. And if the wireless had been on, then I couldn't have helped hearing of it, for them walls at the back ain't only plaster, and he allus had it on a roaring powerful hard on account of him being hard of hearing." "I see," said Mr. Kirk. "No harm," said Mrs. Ruddle, backing away from the table, "no harm in borrowing a drop of paraffin." "Well," replied Kirk cautiously, "that's neither here nor there. 9:30 news. That's on the National. That's right. We never trouble with the 6 o'clock. Peter consulted Kirk with a glance, stepped over to the radio cabinet and raised the lid. "The pointer," he observed, "is set to regional." "Well, if you ain't altered it since." Peter shook his head. And Kirk continued, "Looks like he didn't have it on. Not for the 9:30. Well, we're getting there, aren't we? Whittling the time down. Line upon line, line upon line. Here little, there little. Isaiah," said Peter, shutting down the lid. "Or is it more appropriately Jeremiah?" "Isaiah, my lord. And no call for lamentations that I can see. That's pretty satisfactory, that is. Dead or unconscious at 9:30. Last seen alive about 6:20. Ate his supper at 6:20, cried Mrs. Ruddle. "Oh, go on. He was alive and kicking at 9 o'clock. "What? How do you know? Why didn't you say so before?" "Well, I thought you knowed it. You didn't ask. And how did I know? 'Cause I seen him, that's why. Here, what are you getting at? Trying to put something on me? You know as well as I do he was alive at 9. Joe Selden here was talking to him." Kirk gaped, dumbfounded. "Eh?" he said, staring at the constable. Yes," muttered Selden, dully. "That's right." "Course it is," said Mrs. Ruddle. Her small eyes gleamed with malicious triumph, behind which lurked an uneasy horror. "You don't catch me that way, Joe Selden. I come in 9 o'clock from fetching a pail of water, and I sees you plain as the nose on my face a-talking to him at this very window. Ah, and I heard you, too, using language you did ought to be ashamed of yourself. Not fit for a decent woman to listen to. I come up the yard, which you know where the pump is, and the only water fit to drink, by you goes down to the village, Mr. Kirk, and always free permission to use the pump in the yard, without it's for washing, but I always uses rainwater on account of the woollens, and I hears you from the pump. Yes, you may look, and I says to myself, 'Lor,' I says, 'whatever is a-going on?' And I comes round the corner of the houses, and I sees you, and your helmet, so don't you go denying of it." "All right, Ma," said Kirk, shaken, but sticking loyally by his subordinate. "Much obliged." "Well, that brings us pretty near the time. 9 o'clock, you say it was?" "Nears makes no difference. My clock said 10 past, but it gains a bit. But you ask Joe Selden. If you want to know the time, ask a policeman." "Ha! Very good," replied the superintendent. "Well, he just wants a bit of confirmation on that there point. 2 witnesses are better than 1, that'll do. Now, just you run along, and see here, don't you get shooting your mouth off." "I'm sure," said Mrs. Ruddle, bridling, "I ain't one to talk."
"Certainly not," said Peter. "That's the last thing anybody would accuse you of. But you see you're a very important witness, you and Selden here, and there might be all sorts of people, reporters and so on, trying to wheedle things out of you. So you must be very discreet, just like Selden, and come down sharp on them. Otherwise you might make things difficult for Mr. Kirk." "Joe Selden, indeed," said Mrs. Ruddle contemptuously. "I can do as well as him any day. I hope I knows better than to go talking to newspaper fellers. A nasty, vulgar lot." "Most unpleasant people," said Peter. He made for the door, driving her gently before him like a straying hen. "We know we can rely on you, Mrs. Ruddle, thou foster child of silence and slow time. Whatever you do," he added earnestly, as he propelled her over the threshold, "don't say anything to Bunter. He's the world's worst chatterbox." "Certainly not, my lord," said Mrs. Ruddle. The door closed. Kirk drew himself up in the big chair. His subordinate sat huddled, waiting for the explosion. "Now, Joe Selden, what's the meaning of this?" "Well, sir, I'm disappointed in you, Joe," went on Kirk, with more distress than anger in his puzzled voice. "I'm astonished. Mean to say you was there at 9 o'clock talking to Mr. Noakes, and you said nothing about it? Ain't you got no sense of duty?" I'm sure I'm very sorry, sir." Lord Peter Wimsey strolled over to the window. One does not interfere with another man taking off his subordinate. "All the same, sorry. That's a nice word to use. You, a police officer, withholding important evidence, and you say you're sorry?" "Dereliction of duty, yes, that was the first way to strike one." "I didn't mean—" began Selden, then furiously, "I didn't know that the old cat had seen me." "What the hell does it matter who saw you?" cried Kirk, with rising exasperation. "You ought to have told me first thing." "My God, Joe Selden, I don't know what to make of you. Upon my word, I don't. You're for it, my lad." The wretched Selden sat twisting his hands together, finding no answer but a miserable mumble. "I'm sorry." "Now look here," said Kirk, with a dangerous note in his voice. "What were you doing there that you didn't want anybody to know about? Now speak up." Wait a minute. Wait a minute. He's seen it, thought Peter, and turned round. "You're left-handed, ain't you?" "Oh, my God, sir, my God. Look, I never done it. I swear I never done it. Heaven knows I had cause enough, but I never done it. I never laid a hand on him." "Cause? What cause?" "Come on now, out with it. What were you doing with Mr. Noakes?" Selden looked round wildly. At his shoulder stood Peter Wimsey, with an inscrutable face. "I never touched him. I never done nothing to him. If I was to die the next minute, sir, I am innocent." Kirk shook his massive head like a bull teased by gadflies. "What were you doing up here at 9 o'clock? "Nothing," said Selden stubbornly. The excitement died out of him. "Only to pass the time of day." "Time of day?" echoed Kirk, with so much contempt and irritation that Peter nerved himself to interfere. "Look here, Selden," he said, in a voice that had induced many a troubled private to disclose his pitiful secrets, "you'd much better make a clean breast of it to Mr. Kirk, whatever it is." "This," growled Kirk, "is a nice thing, this is. A police officer—" "Look, go easy with him, Superintendent," said Peter. "He's only a youngster." He hesitated. Perhaps it would be easier for Selden without an outside witness. "Look, I'll push along into the garden," he said reassuringly. Selden turned in a flash. No, I'll come clean." "Oh, my God," said Lord, "don't go, my lord, don't you go." "I made a damn fool of myself." "We all do that at times," said Peter softly. "You'll believe me, my lord." "Oh, God, this'll break me." "I shouldn't wonder," said Kirk grimly. Peter glanced at the superintendent, saw that he too recognized the appeal to authority older than his own, and sat down on the edge of the table. "Pull yourself together, Selden. Mr. Kirk's not the man to be hard or unjust to anybody. Now, what was it all about?" "Well, that there note case of Mr. Noakes, what he lost." 2 years ago? Yes, well, what happened to it?" "I found it. He dropped it in the road. £10 he'd had in it. Well, my wife was desperate bad after the baby. Doctor said she ought to have special treatment. I hadn't saved nothing, and the pay's not much, nor the allowance. Oh, I've been a damn fool. I meant to put it back right away. I thought he could spare it being well off. I know we're supposed to be honest, but it's a dreadful temptation in a man's way." "Yes," said Peter. "A generous country expects a lot of honesty for £2 or £3 a week." Kirk seemed incapable of speech, so he went on. "And what happened about it?" "He found out, my lord. I don't know how, but he did. Threatened to report me. Well, of course, that would have been the end of me, out of a job, and who'd have given me work after that? So I had to pay him what he said to stop his tongue." "Pay him?" "That's blackmail," said Kirk, coming out of his stupefaction with a pounce. He spoke the words as though they were somehow a solution of this incredible situation. "It's an indictable offence, blackmail, and compounding a felony. Call it what you like, sir, it was life and death to me. 5 bob a week he'd been bleeding me for these last 2 years. "Good God," said Peter, disgusted. "And I'll tell you, my lord, when I come into this room this morning and I heard as he was dead, it was like a breath of heaven to me. But I didn't kill him, I swear I didn't. You do believe me? My lord, you believe me? I didn't do it." "I don't know that I could blame you if you had." "But I didn't," said Selden eagerly. Peter's face was non-committal, and he turned to Kirk again. "It's all right, sir. I know I've been a fool, and worse, and I take my medicine, but as sure as I stand here, I did not kill Mr. Noakes." "Well, Joe," said the superintendent heavily, "it's bad enough without that. You've been a fool, and no mistake. We'll have to see about that later. You better tell us now what did happen." "I came up to see him, to tell him I hadn't got the money that week. He laughed in my face, the old devil. What time was this?" Well, I came up here by the path, and I looked in at that there window. The curtain wasn't drawn, and it was all dark. Only then I see him coming in from the kitchen with a candle in his hand. He holds the candle up to the clock there, and I see it was 9:05. Peter shifted his position and spoke quickly. You saw the clock from the window? You're sure?" The witness failed to catch the note of warning, and said briefly, "Yes, my lord." He licked his lips nervously and went on. "Then I taps on the window, and he comes over and opens it. I tells him I ain't got the money, and he laughs at me, nasty-like. 'All right,' he says, 'I'll report you in the morning.' So then I plucks up heart, and I says to him, 'You can't, it's blackmail. All this money you've been taking off me is blackmail, and I'll see you in the dock for it.' And he says, 'Money? You can't prove you ever paid me money. Where's your receipts? You got nothing on paper.' So I swears at him." "No wonder," said Peter. "'Get out,' he says, and slams the window shut. I tried the doors, but they was locked, so I gets out, and that's the last I sees of him." Kirk drew a long breath. "You didn't go into the house?" "No, sir." "Are you telling the truth?" "Honest to God I am, sir." "Selden, are you sure?" This time the warning was unmistakable. "It's God's truth, my lord." Peter's face changed. He got up and walked slowly over to the fireplace. "Well," said Kirk, "I don't rightly know what to say. Look, see here, Joe, you better go over straight away to Pagford and check up that alibi for Crutchley. See this man Williams at the garage and get a statement from him." "Very good, sir," said Selden in a subdued tone. "I'll talk to you when you come back." Selden said again, "Very good, sir." He looked at Peter, who was gazing down at the burning logs, and made no movement. "I hope you won't be too hard on me, sir." "That's as may be," said Kirk, not unkindly. The constable went out, his big shoulders drooping. "Well," said the superintendent, "and what do you think of that?" It sounded straight enough, so far as the note case was concerned. So there's a motive for you. A nice new motive, all a-growing and a-blowing. Widens the field a bit, doesn't it? Blackmailers don't, as a rule, stop at a single victim. Kirk scarcely noticed this ingenious attempt to divert him from his natural suspicions. It was the breach of duty by one of his own officers that hurt him. Theft and concealment of evidence.
He hammered on at this wretched worry, the angrier because it was the kind of thing that need never have occurred. Why couldn't the fool have come to his sergeant if he was so sure, or to me? This is the devil and all. Beats me altogether. I wouldn't have believed it. There are more things in heaven and earth, said Peter, with a kind of melancholy amusement. Ah, that's so, my lord. There's a lot of truth in Hamlet. Hamlet? Peter's bark of harsh laughter astonished the superintendent. By God, you're right. Village or hamlet of this merry land, stir up the mud of the village pond and the stink will surprise you. He paced the room restlessly. The light thrown on Mr. Noakes's activities had only confirmed his own suspicions, and if there was one sort of criminal whom he would have been ready to strangle with his bare hands, it was the blackmailer. 5 shillings a week for 2 years. He could not doubt that part of the story. No man would so pile up the evidence against himself unless he were telling the truth. All the same, he stopped abruptly at Kirk's side. "Look here," he said. "You've had no official information about that theft, have you? And the money's been paid back twice over." Kirk fixed him with a steady eye. It's easy enough for you to be soft-hearted, my lord. You take your responsibility." This time the kid gloves were off, and Peter took it on the chin. "Cough," added Kirk reflectively. "That there Noakes, he must have been a proper old twister. It's a damned ugly story, just enough to make a man—" But it was not. Nothing was enough for that. "Oh, hell," said Peter, beaten and exasperated. "What's up?" "Superintendent, I'm sorry for that poor devil, but— curse it, I suppose I have got to say it." "Well?" Kirk knew that something was coming and braced himself to meet it. Force Peter's sword to the wall, and they will tell the truth. He had said so, and now his words were to be proved upon him, and he'd got to take the punishment. "That story of his, it sounded all right, but it wasn't. One bit of it was a lie." "A lie?" "Yes. He said he never came into the house. He said he saw the clock from that window." "Well?" "Well, I tried to do the same thing just now when I was out in the garden. I wanted to set my watch. Well, it can't be done, that's all. That damned awful cactus is in the way." "What?" Kirk sprang to his feet. "I say that infernal bloody cactus is in the way. It covers the face of the clock. You can't see the time from that window." "You can't?" Kirk darted towards the window, knowing only too well what he'd find there. "You can try it," said Peter, "from any point you like. It's absolutely and definitely impossible. You cannot see the clock from that window." Chapter 10. 4 Ale Bar. "What should I have done?" I cried with some heat. "Gone to the nearest public house. That is the centre of country gossip." Arthur Conan Doyle, The Solitary Cyclist. The police were out of the house by tea-time. Indeed, the unhappy Kirk, having ascertained that by no dodging, stooping, or standing on tiptoe could anyone obtain a sight of the clock-face from the window, found himself with but little zest to prolong his inquiries. He made the half-hearted suggestion that Noakes might have temporarily removed the cactus from its spot after 6:20, and replaced it before 9:30, but he could offer himself no plausible explanation of any such aimless proceeding. There was, of course, only Crutchley's word for it that the plant had been there at 6:20. If there was even that, Crutchley had mentioned watering it. He might have taken it down and left it for Noakes to put back. One could ask, but even as he made a note of his intention, Kirk felt little hope of any result. He examined the bedrooms in a dispirited way, impounded a number of books and papers from a cupboard, and again examined Mrs. Ruddle about Sellen's interview with Noakes. The result of all this was not very satisfactory. A notebook was discovered, containing, among other entries, a list of weekly payments, 5 shillings at a time, under the initials J.S. This corroborated a story that scarcely needed corroboration. It also suggested that Sellen's frankness might be less a virtue than a necessity, since had he suspected the existence of such a document, he would have realized that it was better to confess before being confronted with it. Peter's comment was, why, if Sellen were the murderer, had he not searched the house for compromising papers? With this consideration, Kirk tried hard to comfort himself. There was nothing else that could be interpreted as evidence of blackmail payments from anybody, though plenty of testimony going to show that Noakes' affairs were in an even worse state of confusion than had hitherto appeared. An interesting item was a bundle of newspaper cuttings and jottings in Noakes's hand, concerning cheap cottages on the west coast of Scotland, a country in which it is notoriously difficult to proceed for the recovery of civil debts contracted elsewhere. That Noakes had been the proper twister Kirk had supposed him was clear enough. Unhappily, it was not his misdoings that needed proof. Mrs. Ruddle was unhelpful. She had heard Noakes slam the window shut and seen Sellen retreat in the direction of the front door. Supposing that the show was over, she had hastened home with her pail of water. She thought she had heard a knocking at the doors a few minutes later, and had thought, he's got some hopes. Asked whether she had heard what the quarrel was about, she admitted with regret that she had not, but, with a malicious grin, supposed as Joe Sellen knew all about it. Sellen, she added, often came to see Mr. Noakes. Her own opinion, if Kirk wanted it, was that he was trying to borrow money, and that Noakes had refused to lend any more. Mrs. Sellen was thriftless, everybody knew that. Kirk would have liked to ask her whether, having last seen Mr. Noakes engaged in a violent quarrel, she had had no qualms about his subsequent disappearance, but the question stuck in his throat. He would be saying, in so many words, that an officer of the law could be suspected of a murder. Without better evidence, he could not bring himself to do it. His next dreary job was to question the Sellens, and he was not looking forward to that. In a mood of the blackest depression, he went off to interview the coroner. In the meantime, Mr. Puffet, having cleared the kitchen chimney from above and assisted at the lighting of the fire, had taken his fee and gone home, uttering many expressions of sympathy and goodwill. Finally, Miss Twitterton, tearful but flattered, was conveyed to Pagford by Bunter in the car, with her bicycle perched high and disposedly upon the back seat. Harriet saw her off and returned to the sitting-room, where her lord and master was gloomily building a house of cards with a greasy old pack which he had unearthed from the whatnot. "Well," said Harriet in unnaturally cheerful tones, "they've gone. At last we are alone." "Well, that's a blessing," said he glumly. "Yes, I couldn't have stood much more, could you?" "Not any more, and I can't stand it now." The words were not said rudely. He sounded merely helpless and exhausted. "I wasn't going to," said Harriet. He made no reply, seeming absorbed in adding the fourth story to his structure. She watched him for a few moments, then decided he was best left alone, and wandered upstairs to fetch pen and paper. She thought it might be a good thing to write a few lines to the Dowager Duchess. Passing through Peter's dressing-room, she found that somebody had been at work there. The curtains had been hung, the rugs put down, and the bed made up. She paused to wonder what might be the significance of this, if any. In her own room, the traces of Miss Twitterton's brief occupation had been removed. The eider-down shaken, the pillows made smooth, the hot water bottle taken away, the disorder of a washstand and dressing-table set to rights. The doors and drawers, left open by Kirk, had been shut, and a bowl of chrysanthemums stood on the window-sill. Bunter, like a steamroller, had passed over everything, flattening out all traces of upheaval. She got the things she needed and carried them down. The card-house had reached the 6th story. At the sound of her step, Peter started. His hand shook, and the whole flimsy fabric dissolved into ruins. He muttered something and began doggedly to rebuild it. Harriet glanced at the clock. It was nearly 5, and she felt she could do with some tea. She had coerced Mrs. Ruddle into putting the kettle on and doing some work. It could not take very long now. She sat down on the settle and began her letter. The news was not exactly what the Duchess would expect to receive, but it was urgently necessary to write something that she might get before headlines broke out in the London papers. Besides, there were things Harriet wanted to tell her, things she would have told her in any case. She finished the first page and looked up. Peter was frowning. Signs of imminent collapse. Without meaning to, she began to laugh. "What's the joke?" said Peter. The tottering cars immediately slid apart, and he damned them fretfully. Then his face suddenly relaxed, and the familiar sidelong smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "I was seeing the funny side of it," said Harriet, apologetically. "This looks not like a nuptial." "True, O God," said he ruefully. He got up and came over to her. "I rather think," he observed in a detached and dubious manner, "I am behaving like a lout." "Do you? Then all I can say is your notion of loutishness is exceedingly feeble and limited. You simply don't know how to begin." He was not comforted by her mockery. "I didn't mean things to go like this," he said lamely. "My dear cuckoo, I wanted it all to be wonderful for you." She waited for him to find his own answer to this, which he did with disarming swiftness. "Yes, vanity, I suppose. Take pen and ink and write it down. His lordship is in the enjoyment of very low spirits, owing to his inexplicable inability to bend Providence to his own designs." "Shall I tell your mother so?" "Are you writing to her?" "Oh, good Lord, I never thought about it, but I'm dashed glad you did. Poor old mater, she'd be horribly upset about it all. She got it firmly into her head that to be married to her white-headed boy meant an untroubled Elysium, world without end. Amen. Strange that one's own mother should know so little about one. Your mother is the most sensible woman I ever met. She has a much better grasp of the facts of life than you have." "Has she?" "Yes, of course. By the way, you don't insist on a husband's rights to read his wife's letters?" "Oh, great heavens, no," said Peter, horrified. "Well, I'm glad of that. It mightn't be good for you. Here's Bunter coming back. We may get some tea. Mrs. Ruddle's in such a state of excitement that she's probably boiled the milk and put the tea leaves into the sandwiches. I ought to have stood over her till she'd finished. Blow Mrs. Ruddle, by all means. But I expect Bunter's doing that already." The precipitate entry of Mrs. Ruddle with a tea-tray gave weight to the supposition. "Which," said Mrs. Ruddle, setting down her burden with a rattle on a small table before the fire, "I'd have brought it before, if it wasn't the policeman from Broxford come a-busting in, just like I was making of the toast. My heart came into my mouth thinking something horrible had happened. But it ain't only Summingses from the coroner, quite a bunch of 'em he had in his hand, and these here is yours." "Oh, yes," said Peter, breaking the seal. "Yes, they've been pretty quick. To wit, to Lord Peter Wimsey, by virtue of a warrant under the hand and seal of John Perkins. All right, Mrs. Ruddle, you needn't wait." "Mr. Perkins, the lawyer, that is," explained Mrs. Ruddle. "A very nice gentleman, so I'm told, though I ain't never seen him to speak to. One of His Majesty's coroners for the said county of Hertfordshire, to be and appear before him on Thursday, the 10th day of October. You'll see him and hear him tomorrow, all right, Mrs. Ruddle. At 11 o'clock in the forenoon, precisely, at the coroner's court at the Crown Inn, situate in the parish of Peglum in the said county. Then and there to give evidence and be examined on His Majesty's behalf, touching the death of William Noakes, and not to depart without leave." "That's all very fine," observed Mrs. Ruddle, "but who's to give my Bert his dinner? 12 o'clock's his time, and I ain't a-going to see my Bert go hungry, not for King George nor nobody." "Bert will have to get on without you, I'm afraid," said Peter solemnly. "You see what it says, 'Herein fail not at your peril.'" "Lor, now," said Mrs. Ruddle. "Peril of what, I should like to know?" "Prison," said Peter in an awful voice. "Me go to prison?" cried Mrs. Ruddle in great indignation. "That's a nice thing for a respectable woman." "Surely you could get a friend to see to Bert's dinner," suggested Harriet. "Well," said Mrs. Ruddle dubiously, "maybe Mrs. Hodges would oblige.
But I'm thinking she'll want to come and hear what's going on at the quest. But there, I dessay I could make a pie tonight and leave it out for Bert." She retreated thoughtfully to the door, returning to say in a hoarse whisper, "Will I have to tell him about the paraffin?" "I shouldn't think so." "Oh," said Mrs. Ruddle. "Not as there's anything wrong in borrowing a drop of paraffin when it's easy replaced, but them there policemen do twist a woman's words so." "I shouldn't think you need to worry," said Harriet. "Shut the door, please, as you go out." "Yes, my lady," said Mrs. Ruddle, and vanished with unexpected docility. "If I know anything about Kirk," said Peter, "they'll adjourn the inquest, so it shouldn't take very long. No, I'm glad John Perkins has been so prompt. We shan't get such a crowd of reporters and people. Shall you mind the reporters very much?" "Not nearly as much as you will." "Don't be so tragic about it, Peter. Make up your mind that the joke's on us this time." "It's that right enough. Helen's going to make a grand cockadoodle over this. Well, let her. She doesn't look as though she got much fun out of life, poor woman. After all, she can't alter the facts. I mean, here I am, pouring out tea for you from a chipped spout, admittedly, but I'm here. I don't suppose she envies you that job. I'm not exactly Helen's cup of tea. She'd never enjoy any tea. She'd always be thinking about the chips. Helen doesn't allow chips. No. She'd insist on silver, even if the pot was empty. Have some more tea. I can't help its dribbling into the saucer. It's the sign of a generous nature, or an overflowing heart, or something." Peter accepted the tea and drank it in silence. He was still dissatisfied with himself. It was as though he had invited the woman of his choice to sit down with him at the feast of life, only to discover that his table had not been reserved for him. Men in these mortifying circumstances commonly find fault with the waiter, grumble at the food, and irritably reject every effort to restore pleasantness to the occasion. From the worst exhibitions of injured self-conceit, his good manners were sufficient to restrain him, but the mere fact that he knew himself to be in fault made it all the more difficult for him to recover spontaneity. Harriet watched his inner conflict sympathetically. If both of them had been 10 years younger, the situation would have resolved itself in a row, tears, and reconciling embraces. But for them that path was plainly marked no exit. There was no help for it. He must get out of his sulks as best he could. Having inflicted her own savage moods upon him for a good 5 years, she was in no position to feel aggrieved. Compared with herself, indeed, he was making a pretty good showing. He pushed the tea-things aside and lit a cigarette for both of them. Then, rubbing fretfully upon the old sore, he said, "You show commendable patience with my bad temper. Is that what you call it? Well, I've seen tempers in comparison with which you'd call that a burst of heavenly harmony. Whatever it is, you are trying to flatter me out of it. Not at all." Very well, he was asking for it. Better use shock tactics and carry the place by assault. "I'm only trying to tell you, in the nicest possible manner, that provided I were with you, I shouldn't greatly mind being deaf, dumb, halt, blind, and imbecile, afflicted with shingles and whooping cough, in an open boat without clothes or food with a thunderstorm coming on. But you are being painfully stupid about it." "Oh, my dear," he said desperately, and with a very red face, "what the devil am I to say to that? Except that I shouldn't mind anything either. Only I can't help feeling that it's I that have somehow been idiot enough to launch the infernal boat, call up the storm, strip you naked, jettison the cargo, strike you lame and senseless, and infect you with whooping cough, and—" "What was the other thing?" "Shingles," said Harriet dryly, "and it isn't infectious." Crushed again. His eyes danced, and all of a sudden her heart seemed to turn right over. "Oh, ye gods, render me worthy of this noble wife. All the same, I have a strong suspicion that I am being managed. I should resent it very much if I were not full of buttered toast and sentiment, 2 things which, as you may have noticed, tend to go together. And that reminds me, hadn't we better get the car out and run over to Broxford for dinner? There's sure to be some sort of pub there, and a little fresh air might help to blow the bats out of my belfry. That's rather a good idea. And can't we take Bunter? I don't believe he's had anything to eat for years. Still harping on my Bunter? I myself have suffered many things for love, very like this. You may have Bunter, but I draw the line at a partie carré. Mrs. Ruddle shall not come tonight. I observe the Round Table rule, to love one only, and to cleave to her. One at a time, I mean, of course. I will not pretend that I have never been linked up before, but I absolutely refuse to be coupled in parallel. Mrs. Ruddle can go home to bake our pies. I'll just finish my letter, and then we can post it in Broxford. But Bunter respectfully requested to be omitted from the party, unless, of course, his lordship required his services. He would prefer, if permitted, to utilize the leisure so kindly placed at his disposal in a visit to the Crown. He should be interested to make the acquaintance of some of the local inhabitants, and as for his supper, Mr. Puffet had been so good as to hint that there was pot luck waiting for him at his house whenever he might care to step in and partake of it. "Which means," said Peter, interpreting the decision to Harriet, "that Bunter wants to get a sideline through the local gossip of the late Noakes and all his household. In addition, he would like to establish diplomatic relations with the publican, the coal merchant, the man who grows the best vegetables, the farmer who happens to have cut down a tree and can oblige with logs, the butcher who hangs his meat longest, the village carpenter, and the man who does a job about the drains. You'll have to put up with me. Nothing is ever gained by diverting Bunter from his own mysterious ends." The bar of the Crown was remarkably full when Bunter made his way in. No doubt the unobtrusive presence of the late Mr. Noakes behind a locked door lent a special body to the mild and bitter. At the entrance of the stranger, the voices, which had been busy, fell silent, and glances, at first directed to the door, were swiftly averted and screened behind lifted tankards. This was fully in accordance with etiquette. Bunter saluted the company with a polite "Good evening," and asked for a pint of old ale and a packet of players. Mr. Gudgeon, the landlord, fulfilled the order with a dignified leisure, observing, as he changed a 10-shilling note, that the day had been fine. Bunter assented to this proposition, saying further that the country air was agreeable after town. Mr. Gudgeon remarked that a many London gentlemen had been known to say the same thing, and inquired whether this was his customer's first visit to that part of the country. Bunter said that, though he had frequently passed through the district, he had never stayed there before, and that Pagleham seemed to be a pretty spot. He also volunteered the information that he was Kentish by birth. Mr. Gudgeon said, indeed, they grew hops there, he believed. Bunter admitted that this was so. A very stout man with one eye intervened at this point to say that his wife's cousin lived in Kent, and that it was all hops where he was. Bunter said there were hops where his mother lived. He himself knew little about hops, having been brought up in London from the age of 5. A thin man, with a lugubrious countenance, said he supposed that there gallon of beer he'd had off Mr. Gudgeon last June came from Kent. This appeared to be a reference to some standing jest, for the bar laughed appreciatively, and much chaff was bandied about, till the thin man closed the discussion by saying, "All right, Jim, call it hops if it makes you feel any better." During this exchange, the customer from London had quietly retired to a window seat, taking his pint with him. The conversation turned upon football. At length, however, a plump woman, who was in fact no other than Mrs. Ruddle's friend, Mrs. Hodges, remarked, with that feminine impulsiveness which rushes in where the laws of creation fear to tread, "You lost a customer, seemingly, Mr. Gudgeon." "Ah," said Mr. Gudgeon. He darted a look towards the window seat, but it encountered only the back of the stranger's head. "Where one goes, another comes, Mrs. Hodges. 'Tain't much you'll be losing on the beer." "You're right," said Mrs. Hodges. "Nor nobody else neither. But is it true he was put away on purpose?" "That's as may be," replied Mr. Gudgeon cautiously. "We'll be hearing to-morrow." "And that won't do no harm to trade, I reckon," observed the one-eyed man. "I dunno about that," retorted the landlord. "We'll have to close the house till it's over. 'Tis only decent. And Mr. Kirk's particular." A scrawny woman of uncertain age piped up suddenly. "What's he look like, George? Can you let us have a peep at him?"
"Oh, hark at Katy!" exclaimed the lugubrious man, as the landlord shook his head. "Can't let a man alone, dead or alive." "Go on, Mr. Puddock," said Katy, and the bar laughed again.
"You're on the jury, ain't you? You gets the front seat free."
"We don't have to view the body these days," Mr. Puddock corrected her. "Not without we ask to.
Here's George Lugg, you better ask him."
The undertaker came out of the inner room, and all eyes were turned to him.
"When's the funeral to be, George?"
"Friday," said Mr. Lugg. He ordered a tankard of bitter, and added to a young man who now came out, locking the door behind him and handing the key to Mr. Gudgeon,
"You better get started, Harry. I'll be along in 2 ticks. We'll want to close him down after the inquest. He'll go till then."
"Aye," said Harry.
"'Tis fine sharp weather."
He called for a half-pint, took it down briskly, and went out, saying,
"See you presently then, Dad."
The undertaker became the centre of a small circle, ghoulishly intent upon descriptive details. Presently the voice of the irrepressible Mrs. Hodges was raised.
"And by what Martha Ruddle says, them as didn't have his custom will lose least by him."
"Ah," said a small man with a fringe of sandy hair and a shrewd eye.
"I've had me doubts. Too many irons in that fire, I reckon. Not as I've got a lot to grumble at. I don't let no books run beyond the month, and I got me money, allus excepting that there currer of bacon as he made trouble about. But it's like that there Attree and these other big companies as goes bust. You puts money out of one thing into another, till you don't rightly know what you got."
"That's right," said the one-eyed man.
"Allus investing in things he was. Too clever by half. And a hard bargain he did drive," said Mrs. Hodges. "Dear, oh dear. Remember when he lent my poor sister that bit of money? Oh, cruel it was. What she had to pay, and making her sign away all her furniture."
"Well, he never made much on the furniture," said the sandy man.
"A soaking wet day that was when they come up for sale. Tom Dudden had 'em over at Pagford, and there wasn't a soul there but the dealers."
An ancient man with long grey whiskers raised his voice for the first time.
"Ill-gotten goods never thrive. 'Tis in the Scriptures. Because he hath oppressed and forsaken the poor, because he hath violently taken away a house which he builded not." Ah, and the furniture too. "Therefore shall no man look for his goods. In the fullness of his sufficiency shall he be in straits." Ain't that so, Mr. Gudgeon? "He shall flee from the iron weapon. Aye, there ain't no good fleeing when the hand of the Lord is agin a wicked man. There's a curse upon him, and we have lived to see it fulfilled."
"Wasn't there a gentleman came down from London this morning with a writ agin him?"
"In the same pit that he dig for others is his foot taken. Let the extortioner consume all that he hath. 'Tis writ so. Ah, let his children be vagabonds and beg their bread."
There, Dad," said the innkeeper, seeing that the old gentleman was becoming excited. "He ain't got no children, praise be."
"Ah, that's true," said the one-eyed man. "But he have got a niece. It'll be a sad come down for Aggie Twitterton. Wonderful set-up she allus was, thinking there was money coming into her."
"Well," said Mrs. Hodges, "them as gives themselves airs above other folks don't deserve nothing but disappointments.
Her dad wasn't only Ted Baker's cowman when all's said and done, and a dirty, noisy, foul-mouthed fellow in his drink what's more, and there ain't no call to be proud on."
"That's right," said the old man.
"A very violent man. Beat his poor wife something cruel he did." "If you treat a man like dirt," opined the one-eyed man, "he'll act dirty. Dick Twitterton was a decent sort enough till he took it into his head to marry the schoolmistress with her airs and la-di-dar ways. 'Wipe your boots on the mat,' she says to him, 'before you comes into the parlour.' What's the good of a wife like that to a man when he comes in mucky from the beasts and wanting his supper?" "Good-looking feller, too, wasn't he?" said Katy. "No, Katy," said the lachrymose man reprovingly. "Yes, he was a well-set-up man, was Dick Twitterton. That's what the schoolmistress fell for, you see. You be careful of that soft heart of yours, or it'll get you into trouble."
More chaff followed upon this. Then the undertaker said,
"None the more for that. I'm sorry for Aggie Twitterton." "Bah," said the lachrymose man, "she's all right. She's got her ends in the church organ, and she don't do so bad. Getting a bit long in the tooth now, but a man might go farther and fare worse." "Well there, Mr. Puddock," said Mrs. Hodges, "don't say you're thinking of making an offer." "Ah, he's one to talk, ain't he?" said Katy, delighted to get her own back. The old man chimed in solemnly. "Now do we look where you're going, Ted Puddock. There's bad blood on both sides with Aggie Twitterton. Her mother was Willum Noakes's sister, now don't 'ee forget that. And Dick Twitterton, he was a violent, God-forsaken man, a swearer and a Sabbath-breaker." The door opened to admit Frank Crutchley. He had a girl with him. Bunter, forgotten in his corner, summed her up as a lively young person with an up-and-coming eye. The couple appeared to be on affectionate, not to say intimate terms, and Bunter gained the impression that Crutchley was seeking consolation for his losses in the linked arms of Bacchus and Aphrodite. He stood the young lady a large port. Bunter shuddered delicately, and submitted with good humour to a certain amount of chaff when he offered drinks all round. "Come into a fortune, have you, Frank? Mr. Noakes have left him his share of liabilities, that's what it is. Ha, ha, ha! Thought you said your speculations had gone wrong. That's the way with these here capitalists. Every time they loses $1 million, they orders a case of champagne. Here, Polly, don't you know better to go about with a chap what speculates? She thinks she'll earn him better when he's bringing the money home to her. Ha, ha! And so I would," said Polly with some vigour. "Ah, thinking of getting sliced, you two?" "No charge for thinking," said Crutchley. "How about the young lady in London, Frank?" "Which one's that?" retorted Crutchley. "Oh, hark at him. He've got so many he don't know how to keep count on 'em. You watch your step, Polly. Maybe he's married 3 times already." "I should worry," said the girl, with a toss of her head. "Well, well, after a burying comes a wedding. Tell us when it's to be, Frank." "I'll have to save up for the parson's fee," said Crutchley, good-temperedly, "seeing my £40 gone west. But it was almost worth it to see old Aggie Twitterton's face. 'Ah, Uncle's dead and the money's gone,' she said. 'Oh, and him that rich. Who'd have thought it? Silly old cow.'" Crutchley laughed contemptuously. "Hurry up with your port, Polly, if you want us to get over in time for the big picture." "So that's what you're after. Ain't going into no mourning for old Mr. Noakes, is you, from the look of it?" "Him?" said Crutchley. "No fear, the dirty old twister. There'll be more pickings out of my lord than ever there was out of him. Pockets full of banknotes and a nose like a cheese-faced rabbit." "Hey," said Mr. Gudgeon, with a warning glance. "His lordship will be much obliged to you, Mr. Crutchley," said Bunter, emerging from the window-seat. Sorry," said Crutchley. I didn't see you were there. No offence meant. A joke's a joke. What'll you take, Bunter?" "I'll take no liberties from anyone," said the gentleman with dignity. "Mr. Bunter to you, if you please. And by the way, Mr. Gudgeon, I was to ask you kindly to send up a fresh 9-gallon cask to Tallboys, the one that's there being the property of the creditors, as we understand." "Oh, right you are," said the landlord with alacrity. "When would you like it?" "First thing tomorrow," replied Bunter, "and another dozen of baths while it settles." "Ah, Mr. Puffet, good evening. I was just thinking of looking you up." "Ah, you're welcome," said Mr. Puffet heartily. "I just came along to fetch up the supper ale, George being called out. There's a cold pie in the house, and Ginny'll be glad to see you. Make it a quart, then, Mr. Gudgeon, if you please." He handed a jug over the counter, which the landlord filled, saying as he did so to Bunter, "That's all right, then. It'll be up at 10 o'clock, and I'll step round and tap it for you." "I am much obliged to you, Mr. Gudgeon. I shall attend personally to its reception." Crutchley had seized the opportunity to go out with his young woman. Mr. Puffet shook his head. Off to the pictures again. What I say is, they things are unsettling the girl's mind nowadays. Silk stockings and all. You wouldn't have seen that in my young days." "Oh, come now, Frank," said Mrs. Hodges. "Polly have been walking out with Frank a good while now. 'Tis time to settle between 'em. She's a good girl for all she's saucy in her ways." "Made up his mind, have he?" said Puffet. "Thought he was set on having a wife from London. At that, maybe he thinks she won't have him now he's lost his £40. Catch 'em on the rebound, as they say. That's how they make marriages these days. A man may do all he likes, as some lass gets him in the end, for all his running and dodging like a pig in a lane. But I likes to see a bit of money into the bargain. There's more to marriage, as they say, than 4 bare legs in a bed. Oh, hark at him, says Katy. Or legs in silk stockings neither, said Mr. Puffet. Well, Tom, said Mrs. Hodges comfortably, you're a widow man with a bit of money, so there's a chance for some of us yet. Is there? Retorted Mr. Puffet. Well, I'll give you leave to try. Now, Mr. Bunter, if you're ready. Is Frank Crutchley a native of Paglum? Inquired Bunter, as they walked away up the road slowly, so as not to set the beer all of a froth. No, said Mr. Puffet. He came here from London. Answered an advertisement of Mr. Hancock's. Been here 6 or 7 years now. I don't fancy he's got no parents, but he's a pushing young feller, only all the girls is arter him, which makes it hard for him to settle. I'd have thought he had more sense than to take up with Polly Mason. Serious like, I mean. He was allus set to look for a wife as could bring him a bit. But there, say what you like beforehand, a man proposes and a woman disposes on him for good and all. But then it's too late to be careful. Look at your good gentleman. I dare say now there was a many rich young ladies arter him, and maybe he said he didn't want none of 'em. And here he is on his honeymoon. And from what they was a-telling the Reverend, not a wealthy young lady neither. His lordship, said Mr. Bunter, married for love. Ah, yeah, I thought as much, said Mr. Puffet, shifting the jug to his other hand. Ah, well, he can afford it, I'd say. At the conclusion of a pleasant and, on the whole, profitable evening, Mr. Bunter congratulated himself on a number of things attempted and done. He had ordered the beer, he had put, through Mr. Puffet's ginny, a nice duck in hand for the following day, and Mr. Puffet knew a man who could send round 3 pounds of late peas in the morning. He had also engaged Mr. Puffet's son-in-law to deal with the leak in the copper and mend 2 broken panes in the scullery. He had found out the name of a farmer who cured his own bacon, and had written and posted to London an order about coffee, potted meats, and preserves. Before leaving Talboys he had assisted Mrs. Ruddle's Bert to bring the luggage upstairs, and now he had his lordship's wardrobe arranged as fittingly as might be in the cupboards at his disposal. Mrs. Ruddle had made up a bed for him in one of the back rooms, and this, though of minor importance, brought with it a certain satisfaction. He went round stoking all the fires, observing with pleasure that Mrs. Ruddle's friend's husband, Mr. Hodges, had delivered the logs as requested. He laid out his lordship's pyjamas, gave a stir to the bowl of lavender in her ladyship's bedroom, straightened the trifling disorder which she had left on the toilet table, whisking away a few grains of powder and putting the nail-scissors back in their case. He noticed with approval an absence of lipstick. His lordship had a particular dislike of pink-stained cigarette ends. Nor, as he had before thankfully observed, did her ladyship enamel her nails to the likeness of blood-stained talons. A bottle of varnish there was, but it was barely tinted. Quite good style, thought Bunter, and gathered up a pair of stout shoes for cleaning. Down below he heard the car draw up to the front door and stand panting. He slipped out by the privy stair. "Tired, Domina?" "Rather tired. But much better for the run. Such a terrific lot seems to have happened lately, hasn't it? Like a drink?" "No, thanks. I think I'll go straight up." "Right you are. I'm only going to put the car away." Bunter, however, was already dealing with this. Peter walked round to the shed and listened to what he had to say. "Yes, we saw Crutchley and his young woman in Broxford. When the heart of a man is oppressed with cares and so on. Have you taken up the hot water?" "Yes, my lord." "Then cut along to bed. I can look after myself for once. The grey suit, with your permission and approval?" "Entirely appropriate, my lord, if I may say so." "And will you lock up?" "We must learn to be householders, Bunter. We will presently purchase a cat and put it out." "Very good, my lord." "That's all, then. Good night, Bunter." "Good night, my lord, and thank you." When Peter knocked at the door, his wife was sitting by the fire, thoughtfully polishing her nails. "I say, Harriet." Would you rather sleep with me tonight?" "Well, I'm sorry, that sounded a little ambiguous. I mean, do you feel any preference for the other room? I won't make a nuisance of myself if you're feeling fagged. Or I'll change rooms with you if you'd rather." "That's very sweet of you, Peter. But I don't think you ought to give way to me when I'm merely being foolish. Are you going to turn out one of those indulgent husbands?" "Oh, heaven forbid. Arbitrary and tyrannical to the last degree. But I have my softer moments, and my share of human folly." Harriet rose up, extinguished the candles, and came out to him, shutting the door behind her. "Folly seems to be its own reward," said he. "Very well. Let's be foolish together." Chapter 11. Policeman's Lot. Elbow. "What is your worship's pleasure I shall do with this wicked caitiff?" Aeschylus. "Truly, officer, because he hath some offences in him that thou wouldst discover if thou couldst, let him continue in his courses till thou knowest what they are." William Shakespeare. Measure for Measure. The distressful Mr. Kirk had, in the meantime, spent a strenuous evening. He was a slow-thinking man, and a kindly one, and it was with reluctance and with the expenditure of severe mental labour that he hammered out a procedure for himself in this unusual situation. His sergeant, having returned to drive him over to Broxford, he sank back in the passenger's seat, his hat pulled over his eyes, and his thoughts revolving silently in this squirrel-cage of mystification. One thing he saw clearly. The coroner must be persuaded to take as little evidence as possible at the inquest, and to adjourn sine die, pending further investigation. Fortunately, the law now provided for such a course, and if only Mr. Perkins would not be sticky, everything might pass off very well. The wretched Joe Selland would have, of course, to speak to seeing Mr. Noakes alive at 9 o'clock, but with luck he would not have to go into details about the conversation. Mrs. Ruddle was the stumbling block. She liked to use her tongue, and then there was that unfortunate business of Aggie Twitterton's hens, which had left her with a grudge against the police. Also, of course, there was the awkward fact that 1 or 2 people in the village had wagged their heads when Mr. Noakes lost his pocket-book, and had hinted that Martha Ruddle might know something about it. She would not readily forgive Joe Selland for that misunderstanding. Could one, without actually uttering threats or using improper methods, suggest that over-informativeness in the witness box might involve an inquiry into the matter of paraffin? Or was it safer merely to hint to the coroner that too much talk from Martha would tend to hamper the police in the execution of their duty? "Half a mo, Blades," said the superintendent aloud at this point in his meditations. "What's that chap doing there, obstructing the traffic like that? Here, you! Don't you know better than to park that lorry of yours on a blind corner? If you want to change your wheel, you must go further along and get her onto the verge." "All right, my lad, that's quite enough of that. Let's have a look at your licence." As for Joe Selland, this business of parking on bends now, you wouldn't have it. A dash sight more dangerous than fast driving by a man who knew how to drive. The police liked to be fair. It was the magistrates who were obsessed by miles per hour. All corners should be approached dead slow. All right, because there might be some fool sitting in the middle of the road, but equally nobody should sit in the middle of the road, because there might be some fool coming round the corner. The thing was 50-50, and the blame should be distributed 50-50. That was only just. In a routine matter like that, it was easy to see one's way. But Joe Selland, now. Well, whatever happened, Joe must be taken off the Noakes case PDQ. It wasn't proper to have him investigating as things were. I come to think of it, Mrs. Kirk had been reading a book only the other day in which one of the police in charge of the case turned out actually to have done the murder. We distinctly remembered laughing and saying, "It's wonderful what these writer-fellows think of." That Lady Peter Wimsey, who wrote these books, she'd be ready enough to believe a tale like that. So, no doubt, would other people. Was that Bill Skipton getting over the stile, Blaze? Seems a bit anxious to avoid notice. Better keep your eye on him. Mr. Rakes has been complaining about his birds. Shouldn't wonder if Bill was up to his old tricks again. Yes, sir. It all went to show that an officer couldn't take too much trouble about getting to know his men. A kindly inquiry, a word in season, and Selland wouldn't have got himself into this jam. How much did Sergeant Foster know about Selland? Yes, one must look into that. Rather a pity, in a way, that Foster was a bachelor and a teetotaler, and belonged to a rather strict sect of Plymouth Brethren or something. A most trustworthy officer, but not very easy for a young fellow to confide in. Perhaps one ought to give more attention to these traits of character. Handling men was born in some people. This Lord Peter, for instance. Selden had never met him before, yet he was readier to explain to him than to his own superior officer. One couldn't resent that, of course. It was only natural. What was a gentleman for, except to take your difficulties to? Why, look at the old squire and his lady when Kirk was a lad. Everybody in and out of the big house all day with their troubles. That sort was dying out, more the pity. Nobody could go to this new man that had the place now. For one thing, half the time he wasn't there, and for another, he always lived in a town and didn't understand the way things worked in the country. But how Joe could be such a blamed fool as to tell his lordship a lie, which was the one thing that sort of gentleman would never overlook. You could see his face change when he heard it. You needed a pretty good reason for telling a lie to a gentleman that was taking an interest in you. And, well, the reason you might have didn't bear thinking of. The car drew up before Mr. Perkins's house, and Kirk heaved himself out with a deep sigh. Maybe Joe was telling the truth after all. He must look into that. Meanwhile, do the thing that's nearest. Was that Charles Kingsley or Longfellow? And dear, dear, it just showed you what happened when lame dogs were left to get over stiles on their own 3 legs. The coroner proved amenable to the suggestion that, in view of investigations now proceeding, based on information received, the inquest should be kept as formal as possible. Kirk was glad Mr. Perkins was a lawyer. Medical coroners sometimes took the oddest views of their own importance and legal powers. Not that the police were anxious for any curtailing of the coroner's privileges. There were times when an inquest came in very handy to elicit information which couldn't be got in any other way. The silly public liked to make a fuss about the feelings of witnesses, but that was the public all over, always shouting they wanted to be protected and always getting in your way when you tried to do it for them. Wanting it both ways. No, there was no harm in coroners. Only they ought to put themselves under police guidance. That was the way Kirk looked at it. Anyhow, Mr. Perkins didn't seem eager to cause trouble. He had had a bad cold, too, and would be all the better pleased to keep things short. Well, that was that. Now, about Joe Selden. Better look in at the station first and see if there was anything special needed attending to. The first thing handed to him when he got there was Joe Selden's own report. He had interviewed the man Williams, who asserted positively that Crutchley had come into the garage just before 11 and gone immediately to bed. The 2 men shared a room, and Williams's bed was between Crutchley's and the door. Williams said he didn't think he could have failed to wake up if Crutchley had gone out during the night, because the door squeaked badly on its hinges. He was a light sleeper. As a matter of fact, he had woken up about 1 o'clock with a fellow blowing his horn and knocking at the garage door. Turned out to be a commercial vehicle with a leaking feed, called for repairs and petrol. Crutchley had been asleep then, but Williams saw him when he lit his candle and went down to deal with the vehicle. The window was a dormer. Nobody could get out and down that way, and there were no marks of anybody's having done so. That seemed all right, but in any case it didn't amount to anything, since Snokes must have been dead before 9:30, as it seemed. Unless Mrs. Ruddle was lying, and she'd no cause to lie so far as Kirk could see. She'd gone out of her way to mention her presence in the paraffin shed, and she wouldn't do that for nothing. Unless she was telling lies on purpose to get Selden into trouble. Kirk shook his head. That would be a big assumption to make. Still, lies or no lies, it was a good thing to check all alibis as closely as possible, and this one appeared to be sound. Always supposing Joe Selden wasn't lying again. Oh, confound it! When it came to not being able to trust your own men, oh, no doubt about it, Joe must come off this case. And what was more, for form's sake, he would have to get Williams's evidence checked again and confirmed. A nuisance and a waste of time. He asked where Selden was, and learned that, having waited a little in the hope of seeing the superintendent, he had gone off back to Pagham about an hour ago. They must have missed him on the road then somehow. Why hadn't he come to Tallboys? Oh, drat Selden! Anything else? Not much. P.C. Jordan had been called on to deal with a customer at the Royal Oak, who had used insulting language and behaviour to the landlord, with conduct tending to provoke a breach of the peace. A woman had reported the loss of a handbag containing 9 shillings and 4pence, the return half of a ticket and a latchkey. The sanitary inspector had been in about a case of swine fever at Datchet's farm. A child had fallen into the river off the old bridge and been dexterously retrieved by Inspector Gowdy, who happened to be passing at the time. P.C. Norman had been knocked off his bicycle by a Great Dane under insufficient control and had sprained his thumb. The Noakes affair had been reported by telephone to the Chief Constable, who was in bed with influenza, but wanted an immediate and detailed report in writing. Instructions had come through from headquarters that the Essex County Constabulary wanted a sharp lookout kept for a tramping youth aged about 17. Description: suspected of breaking and entering a house at Saffron Walden. Particulars: stealing a piece of cheese, an Ingersoll watch and a pair of garden shears valued at 3 shillings and 6pence, and thought to be making this way through Hearts. There was a summons wanted for a chimney fire in South Avenue. A householder had complained about a barking dog. 2 lads had been brought in for playing at Crown and Anchor on the steps of the Wesleyan Chapel, and Sergeant Jakes had very competently tracked down and brought to book the miscreant who had improperly rung the fire alarm on Monday evening. A nice quiet day. Mr. Kirk listened patiently and distributed sympathy and praise where they were due, and then rang up Pagford and asked for Sergeant Foster. He was out at Snettishly about that little burglary. Yes, of course. Well, thought Kirk, as he appended his careful signature to a number of routine documents, Datchet's farm was in the Pagham district. He'd put young Sellon onto that. He couldn't do himself much harm over swine fever. He telephoned instructions that Sergeant Foster was to report to him as soon as he returned, and then, feeling empty, went over to his own quarters to enjoy, as best he might, a supper of beefsteak pie, plum cake, and a pint of mild ale. He was just finishing, and feeling a little better, when Sergeant Foster arrived, self-congratulatory about the progress of the burglary, righteously dutiful about being summoned to Broxford when he ought to have been partaking of his evening meal, and coldly critical of his superior's taste in liquor. Kirk never found it easy to get on with Foster. There was, to begin with, this air of teetotal virtue. He disliked having his evening pint referred to as alcohol. Then Foster, though much subordinate to him in rank, was more refined in speech. He'd been educated at a bad grammar school instead of a good elementary school, and never misplaced his H's, though as for reading good literature or quoting the poets, he couldn't do it and didn't want to. Thirdly, Foster was disappointed. He had somehow always missed the promotion he felt to be his due. An excellent officer, but just somehow lacking in something or other. He could not understand his comparative failure, and suspected Kirk of having a down on him. And fourthly, Foster never did anything that was not absolutely correct. This, perhaps, was his real weakness, for it meant that he lacked imagination, both in his work and in handling the men under him. Kirk, feeling oddly at a disadvantage in spite of his age and position, waited till Foster had said all he had to say about the Snettishly burglary, and then laid before him the full details of the Tallboys affair. The outline of it Foster, of course, knew already, since Pagham was in the Pagford district. In fact, Sellon's original report had come through to him only 10 minutes after the report from Snettishly. Being unable to be in 2 places at once, he had then rung up Broxford and asked for instructions. Kirk had told him to proceed to Snettishly. He, Kirk, would personally take charge of the murder. This was just the way Kirk was always standing between him and anything important. On his return to Pagford, he'd found a curiously unsatisfactory report from Sellon, and no Sellon nor any news of him. While he'd been digesting this, Kirk had sent for him. Well, here he was. He was ready to listen to anything the superintendent had to tell him. Indeed, it was really time he was told something. He did not, however, like what he was told, and it seemed to him, as the disgraceful narrative boomed on, that he was being blamed for what? for not acting as a wet nurse to Joe Sellen's baby, apparently. That was very unfair. Did the superintendent expect him personally to examine the household budget of every village constable in the Pagford area? He ought to have seen that this young man had something on his mind. Well, he liked that. Constables were always getting things on their minds, mostly young women, if it wasn't professional jealousies. He had quite enough to do with the men at the Pagford police station. When it came to married police officers in small villages, they ought surely to be supposed capable of looking after themselves. If they couldn't keep themselves and their families on the very generous pay and allowance, then they ought not to have families. He'd seen Mrs. Sellen, a shiftless girl, he thought, pretty before she was married and dressed in cheap finery. He distinctly remembered warning Sellen against wedding her. If, when Sellen got into financial difficulties, he had come to him, as he quite agreed he should have done, he would have reminded Sellen that nothing else was to be expected when one flouted the advice of one's superior officer. He would also have pointed out that by knocking off beer and tobacco, a considerable saving of money might be effected, in addition to the saving of one's soul, always supposing Sellen took any interest in that immortal part of himself. When he, Foster, had been a constable, he'd put away a considerable sum out of his pay every week. "Kind hearts," Kirk was saying, "are more than coronets. Him as said that lived to wear a coronet himself. Mind you, I ain't saying as you've been any way neglectful of your duty, but it do seem a pity as a young fellow should have his career broke, all for want of a bit of help and guidance. Not to speak of this other suspicion, which it's to be hoped won't come to anything." This was more than Foster could stomach in silence. He explained that he had offered help and guidance at the time of Sellen's marriage. It had not been well received. "I told him he was doing a foolish thing, and that girl would be the ruin of him." "Did you?" said Kirk mildly. "Well, then, perhaps it's no wonder he didn't turn to you when he was in a fix. I don't know as I would myself in his place. You see, Foster, when a young fellow's made up his mind, it ain't no good calling the young woman names. You only alienates him and puts yourself in a position where you can't do no good. If I was courting Mrs. K, you don't think I'd have heard a word again her? Not from the chief constable himself. Not likely. Ha! Just you put yourself in his place." Sergeant Foster said briefly that he couldn't put himself in the place of making a fool of himself over a bit of skirt. Still less could he understand taking other people's money, defection from duty, and failure to make proper reports to one's superior officer. "I couldn't make head or tail of the report Sellen sent in. He dropped it in. Didn't seem able to give a proper account of himself to Davidson, who was on duty at the station, and now he's off somewhere and can't be found." "What's that?" "He's not been back home," said Sergeant Foster, "and he's neither rung up nor left a message. I shouldn't be surprised if he'd made tracks." "He was over here looking for me at 5 o'clock, said Kirk unhappily. "He brought a report from Pagford." "He wrote that out in the station, I'm told," said Foster, "and he left a bunch of shorthand stuff. They're typing it now. Davidson says it doesn't seem to be complete. I suppose it breaks off at the point where—" "What do you expect?" retorted Kirk. "You don't suppose he'd go on taking down his own confession, do you? Be reasonable. What's worrying me is that if he was here at 5, we ought to have passed him between here and Pagleham, if he was going home. I hope he ain't rushed off to do something rash. That'd be a nice thing, wouldn't it? Maybe he took the bus. But if he did, where's his bike?" "Well, if he took the bus, he didn't get home by it," said the sergeant grimly. His wife must be worrying. I think we'd better have a look-see into this. We don't want nothing of an unfortunate nature to happen. Now, work it you got to. You take your bike. No, that won't do. Takes too long. And you've had a pretty hard day. Look, I'll send Art on his motorbike to see if anybody's seen Sellen round Pillington way. It's all wood round there, and the river. You don't really think. I don't know what to think. I'm going over to see his wife. Shall I give you a lift over? Your bike can be sent back tomorrow. You'll get the bus at Pagleham." Sergeant Foster could find nothing to resent in this offer, though his voice sounded injured in accepting it. As far as he could see, there was going to be an unholy row about Joe Sellen, and Kirk, characteristically, was taking steps to see that whatever happened, he, Foster, should get the blame. Kirk was relieved when they overtook the local omnibus just outside Pagleham.
He could drop his austere companion at once, without suggesting that they should go to Sellen's place together. He found Mrs. Sellen in what Mrs. Ruddle would have called a state of mind. She looked ready to drop with fright when she opened the door to him, and had evidently been crying. She was fair, pretty in a helpless sort of way, and delicate-looking. Kirk noticed, with irritation as well as sympathy, that there was another baby coming. She asked him in, apologizing for the state of the room, which was indeed somewhat disorderly. The 2-year-old, whose arrival in the world was the indirect cause of all Sellen's misfortunes, was ramping noisily about, dragging a wooden horse whose wheels squeaked. The table was laid for a tea, now long overdue. "Joe not come in yet?" said Kirk pleasantly enough. No," said Mrs. Sellen. "I don't know what's gone of him." "Oh, be quiet, Arthur, do. He's not been in all day, and his supper's spoiling." "Oh, Mr. Kirk, Joe ain't in trouble, is he? Martha Ruddle's been saying such things." "Arthur, you bad boy! If you don't give over, I'll take that horse away from you." Kirk captured Arthur and stood him firmly between his own massive knees. "Now you be a good boy," he admonished him. "Grown a lot, ain't he? He'll be getting quite a handful for you. Well, no, Mrs. Sellen, I wanted to have a bit of a talk with you about Joe." Kirk had the advantage of being a local man, having in fact been born at Great Packford. He'd not seen Mrs. Sellen more than twice or thrice before, but he was at least not completely strange, and therefore not completely awe-inspiring. Mrs. Sellen was induced to pour out her fears and troubles. As Kirk had suspected, she knew about Mr. Noakes and his missing note-case. She had not been told of it at the time, naturally, but later, when the weekly payments to Noakes had begun to press heavily on the exchequer, she had wormed it out of Joe. She'd gone about in a state of anxiety ever since, fearing that something dreadful would happen. And then, a week ago today, Joe had had to go and tell Mr. Noakes he couldn't pay that week, and came back looking awful, and saying they were done for now for good and all. He'd been very queer in his ways all the week, and now Mr. Noakes was dead, and Joe was missing, and Martha Ruddle told her there'd been a dreadful quarrel, and— "Oh, I don't know, Mr. Kirk. I'm that terrified he may have done something rash." Kirk, as delicately as he could, asked whether Joe had said anything to his wife about his quarrel with Mr. Noakes. Well, no, not exactly. All he'd said was that Mr. Noakes wouldn't listen to nothing, and it was all up. He wouldn't answer no questions, seemed regular fed up like. Then he'd suddenly said he thought the best thing would be to chuck everything and go out to his brother in Canada, and would she go with him? She said, "Why, goodness gracious, Joe, surely Mr. Noakes wasn't going to tell on him after all this long time. It'd be a wicked shame, and after all he'd paid all that money." Joe had only said gloomily, "Well, you'll see tomorrow." And then he'd sat with his head in his hands, and there wasn't nothing to be got out of him. Next day they heard that Mr. Noakes had gone away. She'd been afraid he'd gone to Broxford to tell on Joe. But nothing happened, and Joe cheered up a bit. And then this morning she heard Noakes was dead, and she was that thankful you couldn't think. But now Joe had gone off somewhere, and Martha Ruddle came in with her talk, and since Mr. Kirk had found out about the note case, she supposed it had all come out, and, oh dear, what was she to do, and where was Joe? None of this was very comforting to Kirk. It would have cheered him up a good deal to learn that Sellen had spoken frankly to his wife about the quarrel, and he didn't at all like the reference to the brother in Canada. If Sellen really had done away with Noakes, he would have had about as much chance of escaping to Canada as of being made king of the Cannibal Islands, and reflection must have told him so. But that his first blind impulse should have been to flee the country was unpleasantly significant. It occurred to Kirk, incidentally, that whoever did the murder must have been going through a pretty trying time, for it seemed very unlikely that he or she had thrown Noakes down the cellar steps, else why was the door left open? The murderer, having clubbed Noakes and left him for dead, would have expected— what? Well, if he'd done it in the sitting-room or the kitchen or any room downstairs, the body might have been seen the next time anybody happened to look in at the windows. Mrs. Ruddle or the postman or an inquisitive lad from the village, or the vicar on one of his visits, or Aggie Twitterton might have come over to see her uncle. Any moment the discovery might have been made. Some poor devil— Kirk really felt a passing twinge of pity for the culprit— had been sitting for a whole week on the safety valve wondering. At any rate, the body must have been found the next Wednesday, that was today, because of Crutchley's weekly attendance, if, of course, the murderer knew about that, as he or she was bound to do. Unless the crime could be traced to a passing tramp or somebody, and what a good thing if it could. While thinking this out, Kirk was talking soothingly in his slow speech, saying that something unexpected might have called Joe away. He had sent a man out to hunt him up. A constable in uniform couldn't very well get lost. It didn't do to imagine things. It was queer that Selden— Yes, by God, thought Kirk, that was queer. Queerer than he cared to think about. He must take that away and chew it over. He couldn't think properly with Mrs. Selden's lamenting voice in his ears, and the time didn't fit, because Crutchley had been over an hour in the house before the body was discovered. If Joe Selden had been hanging around there at, say, 11 o'clock instead of past 12... Coincidence? He breathed again. Mrs. Selden was wailing on. "We were that surprised when Willie Abbott came up with the milk this morning to hear as a gentleman had taken Tallboys. We didn't know rightly what to think of it. I said to Joe, surely, I said, Mr. Noakes wouldn't go away like that and let the house, because, of course, we thought he'd let it like he often done before. Not without letting someone know, I said. And Joe looked awful excited. I said, do you suppose he's gone off somewhere, I said. Looks queer to me, I said, and he said, I don't know, but I'll soon find out. And off he went. And he came in afterwards and wouldn't hardly swallow his breakfast, and said, I can't hear nothing, he said. Only there's a lady and gentleman come, and Noakes ain't turned up, he said. And he went out again, and that's the last I see of him. Well, thought Kirk, that puts the lid on it. He'd forgotten the Wimseys, coming in and upsetting everything. Though he was not an imaginative man, he could see Selden, startled by hearing that there was someone in the house, rushing out to learn the news, perplexed beyond expression by the fact that no body had been found, not daring to go and make open inquiries, but hovering round the house, manufacturing excuses for talking to Bert Ruddle, and he didn't like the Ruddles, waiting for the summons he knew must come, to him, the only man in authority, hoping that the people in the house would leave it to him to examine the corpse, remove all evidences. Kirk wiped his forehead, saying apologetically that he felt the room was a little hot. He did not hear Mrs. Selden's reply. He was imagining again. What the murderer— better not call him Selden— what the murderer found in the house was not a helpless pair of London holiday-makers, not some vague artistic couple without practical common sense, not some pleasant retired schoolmistress coming to the country to enjoy a few weeks of fresh air and fresh eggs, but a duke's son who cared for no man and knew exactly where the local bobby got off, who had investigated more murders than Pagham had known in 4 centuries, whose wife wrote detective stories and whose manservant was here, there, and everywhere on swift and silent feet. But supposing, just supposing, the first people who arrived had been Aggie Twitterton and Frank Crutchley, as, in rights, they ought to have been. Even the local bobby could do as he liked with them, take showers, turn them out of the house, arrange things as he chose. Kirk's wits were slow-moving, but when they took hold of a thing, they worked with an efficiency which dismayed their owner. He was trying to make some sort of commonplace rejoinder to Mrs. Selden when there was a sound of a motorcycle drawing up at the gate. Looking out of the window, he saw it was Police Sergeant Hart, with Joe Selden behind him, like 2 Knights Templars on one mount. Well, said Kirk, with a cheerfulness he was far from feeling, here's Joe back, anyhow, safe and sound. But he didn't like the beaten, exhausted look on Selden's face as Hart steered him up the little garden path, and he didn't look forward to questioning him. Chapter 12. Pot Luck.
Why, how now, friends? What saucy baits are you that know not duty or civility? Are we a person fit to be your host, or is our house become your common inn, to beat our doors at pleasure? What such haste is yours that it cannot wait fit times? Are you the masters of this commonwealth, and know no more discretion? John Ford. 'Tis pity she's a whore. Superintendent Kirk was spared the greater part of his ordeal. Selden was in no fit state for undergoing a long interrogation. Sergeant Hart had picked up his trail in Pillington, where he had ridden through on his bicycle about 6:30. Then a girl was found who had seen a policeman following the field path on foot in the direction of Black Raven Wood, a favourite resort of ramblers and children during the summer months. She had particularly noticed him because it was an unusual place in which to see a uniformed policeman. Following, as he said, this indication, Hart had found Selden's bicycle propped against a hedge near the entrance to the path. He had hastened in pursuit, rather uneasy when he remembered that the little wood ran down to the bank of the Pag. It was darkish by that time, and quite dark among the trees. With the aid of his torch he had searched about for some time, calling as loudly as he could. After about 3/4 of an hour, he admitted that it had seemed a lot longer, he came upon Selden sitting on a fallen tree. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting. Seemed dazed-like. Hart asked him what on earth he thought he was about, but could get no sense out of him. He told him pretty sharply that he must come along at once. The super was asking for him. Selden offered no objection, but came without protest. Asked again what brought him there, he said he was trying to think things out. Hart, who knew no details of the Paglum affair, could make neither head nor tail of him. He didn't think he was fit to be trusted to ride back alone, and therefore took him up on the carrier and brought him straight home. Kirk said he couldn't have done better. This explanation took place in the sitting-room. Mrs. Selden had got Joe into the kitchen and was trying to coax him into eating a bit of something. Kirk sent Hart back to Broxford, explaining that Selden was unwell and in a spot of trouble, and warning him not to say too much about it to the other men. He then went in to tackle his black sheep. He soon came to the conclusion that Selden's chief trouble, besides worry, was sheer exhaustion and lack of food. He remembered now that he'd had practically no lunch, though ham sandwiches and bread and cheese had been liberally provided at Tallboys. Selden's account of himself, when Kirk got it out of him, was that after interviewing Williams and writing his report, he had gone straight over to Broxford, expecting to find Kirk already there. He hadn't liked to go back to Tallboys on account of what had happened. It seemed to him he was better out of the way. He'd waited about half an hour for Kirk, but the men kept asking him about the murder, and what with one thing and another he couldn't stick it. So he'd left the station and gone down to the canal and walked about a bit by the gasworks, meaning to come back later. But then it came over him how he'd been and gone and done for himself, and even if he could clear himself of the murder charge, there were no hopes for him. So he'd taken his bike again and gone off. He couldn't rightly remember where or why, because he couldn't get his mind clear, and he thought if he could just go and walk about somewhere, maybe he could think better. He remembered going through Pillington and walking over the fields. He didn't think he had any special reason for going to Black Raven Wood. He only wandered about. He might have fallen asleep. He had had a sort of notion about chucking himself in the river, but he was afraid it would upset his wife. And he was very sorry, sir, but he couldn't say no more than that. Only that he didn't do the murder. But he added oddly, if his lordship didn't believe him, then nobody else would. This didn't seem quite the moment for going into his lordship's reasons for disbelief. Kirk told Selden he was a young fool to go rambling away like that, and that everybody was ready to believe him so long as he was telling the truth, and he'd better go to bed and try and wake up more sensible. He'd frightened his wife quite enough as it was, and here it was close on 10 o'clock. Crumbs, and the chief constable's report not written yet. He would be over in the morning and would see him before the inquest. "You'll have to give evidence, you know," said Kirk, "but I've seen the coroner, and maybe he won't press you too hard on account of the investigations being in progress." Selden only put his head in his hands
and Kirk, really feeling that there was little to be done with him in this state, left him. As he went out, he said what cheering things he could to Mrs. Sellen, and advised her not to fidget her husband with too many questions, but let him rest and try to keep in good heart. All the way back to Broxford, his mind was churning over his new ideas. He couldn't get out of his head that picture of Sellen standing at Martha Ruddle's cottage door, waiting. There was only one thing that gave him comfort, a comfort altogether irrational, that one curious sentence: "If his lordship won't believe me, then nobody else will." There was no reason why Wimsey should believe Sellen if it came to that. There was no sense in it at all. But it had sounded, well, genuine. He could hear again Sellen's desperate cry, "Don't you go, my lord! My lord, you'll believe me!" Kirk, rummaging the filing cabinet of his mind, found words which seemed to him apt. "Thou hast appealed unto Caesar thou shalt go." But Caesar had disallowed the appeal. Not till Kirk, weary and patient, was writing out his report to the chief constable did the great illumination come upon him. He stopped, pen in hand, staring at the wall. Something like an idea that was, and he'd been onto it before, as near as nothing, only he hadn't properly followed it up. But of course it explained everything. It explained Sellen's statement and exonerated him. It explained how he had seen the clock from the window. It explained how Noakes came to be killed behind locked doors. It explained why the body hadn't been robbed. And it explained the murder. Explained it right away. Because Kirk told himself with triumph there had never been any murder. "Wait a bit," thought the superintendent, figuring the thing out in his careful way. "Mustn't go too fast. There's a big snag at the start. Now, how can we get over that, I wonder?" The snag was that to make the theory work, one had to assume that the cactus had been removed from its place. Kirk had already dismissed this idea as silly, but he hadn't seen then what a lot it would explain. He'd gone so far as to have a word with Crutchley among the chrysanthemums just as he left Tallboys. He'd managed the inquiry pretty well, he thought. He had been careful not to ask straight out, "Did you put the cactus back before you left?" That would have drawn attention to a point which was at present a secret between himself and his lordship. He didn't want any talk about that to get round to Sellen before he himself confronted him with it in his own way. So he had merely pretended to have misremembered what Crutchley had said about his final interview with Noakes. It took place in the kitchen? Yes. Had either of them gone back into the sitting-room after that? No. But he thought Crutchley had said he was watering them plants at the time. No, he'd finished watering the plants and was putting back the steps. Oh, then Kirk had got that wrong, sorry. He just really wanted to get at how long the altercation with Noakes had lasted. Had Noakes been there while Crutchley was seeing to the plants? No, he was in the kitchen. But didn't Crutchley take the plants out to the kitchen to water them? No, he watered them just where they were, and wound the clock and came out with the steps. And it wasn't till he'd done that Noakes gave him his day's money and the argument started. It hadn't lasted more than maybe 10 minutes or so, not the argument. Well, possibly 15. 6 o'clock was rightly Crutchley's time to stop work. He charged 5 bob for an 8-hour day, barring time off for lunch. Kirk apologized for his mistake. The stepladder had confused him. He had thought Crutchley meant he needed the stepladder to get the hanging plants out of their pots. No, the stepladder was to get up to water them, same as he'd done this morning. They was above his head, and to wind the clock, like he said. That was all. It was quite ordinary, him using the stepladder. He always did. He put it back in the kitchen afterwards. "You ain't trying to make out," added Crutchley a little belligerently, "as I stood on them steps with a hammer to cosh the old bird over the head." That was an ingenious idea nobody had yet thought of. Kirk replied that he wasn't thinking anything particular, only trying to get the times clear in his head. He was glad to have given the impression that his suspicions were directed to the stepladder.
Unfortunately, then, he couldn't begin by substantiating that the cactus had been out of its pot at 6:20. But now suppose Noakes had taken it out himself for some purpose or other. What purpose? Well, it was difficult to say. But suppose Noakes had seen something wrong with it, a spot of mildew, maybe, or whatever these ugly things suffered from. He might have taken it down to wipe it, or... But he could have done that easy enough standing on the steps, or, as he was so tall, on a chair. No, not good enough. What other things could happen to plants? Well, they might become pot-bound. Kirk didn't know whether that happened to cactuses, or was it cacti. But suppose you wanted to look to see if its roots were growing out through the bottom of the pot. You'd have to take it out for that, or tap the pot to see if... No, it had been given water. But wait! Noakes hadn't seen Crutchley do that. He might have suspected Crutchley was neglecting it. Perhaps he'd felt at the top and it didn't seem wet enough, and then, or more likely, he thought it was being overwatered. These spiky cactus affairs didn't like too much damp. Or did they? It was annoying not to know their habits. Kirk's own gardening was of the straightforward flower-bed and kitchen stuff variety. Anyhow, it wasn't outside the bounds of possibility that Noakes had removed the cactus for some purpose of his own. You couldn't prove he hadn't. Say he did. All right, then. At 9 o'clock, up comes Selland and sees Noakes coming into the parlour. Here Kirk paused to consider again. If Noakes was coming for the 9:30 news as usual, he was before his time. He came in, said Selland, and looked at the clock. The dead man had worn no watch, and Kirk had taken it for granted that he had come in merely to see how near it was to the news bulletin time. But he might also have been meaning to put the cactus back and come in a bit early on that account. That was all right. He comes in. He thinks, now, have I got time to fetch that there plant in from the scullery, or whatever it is, before the news comes on? He looks at the clock. Then Joe Selland taps at the window and he comes over. They have their talk and Joe goes away. The old boy fetches in his plant and gets up on a chair or something to put it back. Or maybe he gets the steps. Then while he's doing that, he sees it's getting on for 9:30, and that flurries him a bit. He leans over too far, or the steps slip, or he ain't careful getting down, and over he goes, backwards, and gives his head a crack on the floor. Or better still, on the corner of the settle. He's knocked out. Then presently he comes to, puts away the chair, or the steps, or whatever it was, and after that we know what happened to him. So there you are. Simple as pie. No cutting or stealing keys or hiding blunt instruments or telling lies. Nothing at all but a plain accident, and everybody telling the truth. Kirk was as much overcome by the beauty, simplicity, and economy of this solution as Copernicus must have been when he first thought of putting the sun in the centre of the solar system and saw all the planets, instead of describing complicated and ugly geometrical capers, move onwards in orderly and dignified circles. He sat and contemplated it with affection for nearly 10 minutes before venturing to examine it. He was afraid of knocking the bloom off it. Still, a theory was only a theory. One had got to find evidence to support it. One must at any time be sure there was no evidence against it. First of all, could a man kill himself like that simply by falling off a pair of steps? Side by side with half-crown editions of English poets and philosophers, flanked on the right by Bartlett's familiar quotations, and on the left by that handy police publication which dissects and catalogues crimes according to the method of their commission, stood, tall and menacing, the 2 blue volumes of Taylor's Medical Jurisprudence, that canon of uncanonical practice and Baedeker of the backdoors to death. Kirk had often studied it in a dutiful readiness for the unexpected. Now he took it down and turned the pages of Volume 1 till it came to the running head Intracranial Hemorrhage, Violence or Disease. He was looking for the story of the gentleman who fell out of a chaise. Yes, here it was. He emerged with a kind of personality from the report of Guy's Hospital for 1859. A gentleman was thrown out of a chaise
and fell upon his head with such violence as to stun him. After a short time he recovered his senses, and felt so much better that he entered the chaise again, and was driven to his father's house by a companion. He attempted to pass off the accident as of a trivial nature, but he soon began to feel heavy and drowsy, so that he was obliged to go to bed. His symptoms became more alarming, and he died in about an hour from effusion of blood in the brain. Excellent and unfortunate gentleman. His name unknown, his features a blank, his life a mystery. Embalmed for ever in a fame outlasting the gilded monuments of princes. He lived in his father's house, so was presumably unmarried and young. A bit of a swell, perhaps, wearing the fashionable new Inverness cape and the luxuriant silky side-whiskers, which was just coming into favour. How did he come to be thrown out of the chaise? Did the horse bolt with him? Had he looked on the wine when it was red? The vehicle, we observe, was undamaged, and his companion, at any rate, sober enough to drive him home. A courageous gentleman, since he was resolute to enter the chaise again. A considerate gentleman, since he made light of the accident in order to spare his parents' anxiety. His premature death must have occasioned much lamentation among the crinolines. No one could have guessed that, nearly 80 years later, a police superintendent in a rural district would be reading his brief epitaph, "A gentleman was thrown out of a chaise." Not that Superintendent Kirk troubled his head with these biographical conjectures. What exasperated him was that the book did not mention the height of the chaise from the ground, or the rate at which the vehicle was proceeding. How would the fall compare in violence with that of an elderly gentleman from a step-ladder onto an oak floor? The next case quoted was even less to the point. This was a youth of 18, who was hit on the head in a fight, went about his business for 10 days, had a headache on the 11th day, and died in the night. Then came a drunken carter, aged 50, who fell from the shafts of his cart and was killed. Now, this seemed more hopeful, except that the wretched creature had fallen 3 or 4 times, the last time being thrown under the wheels of the cart by the bolting horse. So it did seem to show that a short fall would do quite a lot of damage. Kirk pondered a little, and then went to the telephone. Dr. Craven listened with patience to Kirk's theory, and agreed that it was an attractive one. "Only," he said, "if you want me to tell the coroner that the man fell on his back, I can't do it. There's no bruising whatever on the back or on the left-hand side of the body. If you looked at my report to the coroner, you must have seen that all the marks were on the right-hand side and in front, except the actual blow that caused death. I'll tell you again what they are. The right forearm and elbow show heavy bruises, with considerable extravasation from the surface vessels, showing that they were inflicted some time before death. I should say that when he was hit behind the left ear, he was flung over forward on his right side with the force of the blow. The only other marks are bruises and slight abrasions on the shins, hands, and forehead. The hands and forehead are marked with dust, and this suggests, I think, that he got the injuries in falling forward down the cellar steps. He died shortly after that, for there is little extravasation from these injuries. I am, of course, excluding the hypostasis produced by his having lain a whole week face downwards in the cellar. That, naturally, is all in the front part of the body." Kirk had forgotten the meaning of hypostasis, which the doctor pronounced in a very unlikely way, but he gathered that it wasn't a thing that could be made to support the theory. He asked whether Noakes could have been killed by hitting his head in a fall. "Oh, certainly," said Dr. Craven. "But you'll have to explain how he hit the back of his head in falling, and yet came down on his face." With this Kirk had to be content. It looked rather as though a flaw might be developing in his beautifully rounded theory. "It is the little rift within the lute," he thought mournfully, "that by and by will make the music mute." But he shook his head angrily. Tennyson or no Tennyson, he wasn't going to abandon the position without a struggle. He called to his assistance a more robust and comforting poet, one who, hold we fall to rise, or baffled to fight better, called to his wife that he was going out, and reached for his hat and overcoat. If only he could have another look at the sitting-room, he might be able to see how that fall could have come about. At Tallboys, the sitting-room was dark, though a light still burned in the casement above it and in the kitchen. Kirk knocked at the door, which was presently opened by Bunter in his shirt-sleeves. "I'm very sorry to disturb his lordship so late," began Kirk, only then realising that it was past 11. "His lordship," said Bunter, "is in bed." Kirk explained that, unexpectedly, a necessity had arisen to re-examine the sitting-room, and that he was anxious to get this done before the inquest. There was no need for his lordship to come down in person. Nothing was sought but permission to enter. "We should be most unwilling," replied Bunter, "to obstruct the officers of the law in the execution of their duty, but you will permit me to point out that the hour is somewhat advanced and the available illumination inadequate. Besides that, the sitting-room is situated exactly beneath his lordship." "Superintendent! Superintendent!" called a soft and mocking voice from the window above. "My lord?" Mr. Kirk stepped out of the porch to get a view of the speaker. "Merchant of Venice, Act 5, Scene 1. Peace ho! The moon sleeps with Endymion and would not be waked." "I beg your pardon, my lord," said Kirk, devoutly thankful that the mask of night was on his face, and the lady listening too. "Don't mention it. Is there anything I can do for you?" "Only to let me take another look round downstairs," pleaded Kirk apologetically. "Had we but whirled enough in time, that trifling request, Superintendent, were no crime. But take whatever you like. Only do as the poet sings, come and go on lissom clerical printless toe. The first is Marvel, and the second Rupert Brooke." "I'm very much obliged," said Mr. Kirk, generally to cover the permission and the information. "Fact is, I got an idea. I only wish I had half your complaint. Do you want to unfold your tale now, or will it do in the morning?" Mr. Kirk earnestly begged his lordship not to disturb himself. "Well, good luck to it, and good night." Nevertheless, Peter hesitated. His natural inquisitiveness wrestled with a right and proper feeling that he should credit Kirk with intelligence enough to pursue his own inquiries. Proper feeling prevailed, but he remained for 15 minutes perched on the window-sill, while soft scrapes and bumpings sounded from below. Then came the shutting of the front door and steps along the path. "His shoulders are disappointed," said Peter aloud to his wife. "He has found a mare's nest full of cockatrices' eggs." That was perfectly true. The rift in Kirk's theory had widened, and with alarming rapidity silenced all that he could find to say for Joe Selden. Not only was it extremely hard to visualize any way by which Noakes could have fallen so as to injure himself on both sides at once, but it was now plainly evident that the cactus had remained all the while solidly in its place. Kirk had thought of two possibilities. The outer pot might have been unhooked from the chain, or the inner pot removed from the outer. On careful examination, he discounted the first alternative. The brass pot had a conical base, which would prevent it from standing upright when taken down. Moreover, in order to relieve the strain on the hook, the ring, which united the 3 chains that rose from the sides of the pot itself, had been secured to the first link above the hook by a 6-fold twist of stout wire, the ends of which had been neatly turned in with the pliers. No one in his senses would have gone to the trouble of undoing that when he could more easily remove the inner pot. But here Kirk made a discovery which, while it did credit to his detective ability, destroyed all possibility of any such removal. Round the top of the shining brass pot ran a band of pierced work, forming a complicated pattern, and within the openings the earthenware of the inner flower pot was blackened with the unmistakable stain of brass polish. If the flower pot had been removed since the last cleaning, it was inconceivable that it should have been replaced with such mathematical exactness as to show no thin red line of earthenware at the edges of that band of open work. Kirk, disappointed, called Bunter to give his opinion. Bunter, disapproving but correctly ready to assist, agreed absolutely. What was more, when they tried together to shift the inner pot in the outer, it proved to be an exceedingly tight fit. Nobody, unaided, could have turned it after wedging it in so as to make the pierced band coincide with the outline stencilled on the earthenware. Certainly not an elderly man in a hurry by the light of a distant candle. As a forlorn hope, Kirk asked, "Did Crutchley polish the brass this morning?"
"I fancy not. He brought no brass polish with him, nor did he use the materials contained in the kitchen cupboard. Will there be anything further tonight?" Kirk gazed blankly about the room. "I suppose," he suggested despairingly, "the clock couldn't have been moved." "See for yourself," said Bunter. But the plastered wall showed no trace of any hook or nail to which the clock might have been temporarily transferred. The nearest landmark to the east was the nail supporting the Soul's Awakening, and that to the west a fretwork bracket with a plaster image on it, both too light to take the clock and in the wrong line of sight from the window. Kirk gave it up. "Well, that seems to settle it. Thanks very much." "Thank you," retorted Bunter austerely. Still dignified in spite of his shirt-sleeves, he conducted the unwelcome guest to the door as though ushering out a duchess. Being human, Kirk could not but wish he had left his theory alone till after the inquest. All that he had done was to rule it definitely out of court, so that he could not now, in honesty, even hint at such a possibility.